Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was a Friday in late September. Me and 3 of my buddies decided to get out of the city for the weekend. We drove up to this old, semi-abandoned campground my friend's family used to own. It was way off the main road, deep in the state forest, the kind of place where your phone has no service and the only light at night comes from the stars or your own campfire. We'd been there a few hours. It was fully dark, maybe around 9 at night. The air had that crisp, cold bite to it that tells you summer is really over. We were just sitting around the fire, the kind we'd built in this old stone ring that was probably 50 years old. We were roasting hot dogs on these twisted-up wire hangers, laughing about some stupid thing that happened at work, just normal guy stuff. The fire was crackling, sending sparks up into the blackness above the trees. It was perfect. For a little while anyway, I was the first one to hear it. It was easy to miss at first, just a soft snap somewhere off in the woods behind me. I figured it was a deer or a raccoon. The woods are full of noises at night. I didn't even mention it. I just shifted on the log I was sitting on and tried to focus on the conversation, but then it happened again and again. Not random snaps anymore, but a deliberate crunch, crunch, like someone or something was taking slow, heavy steps just outside the ring of firelight. The sound started to move, circling us. It wasn't a deer. Deer are light, skittish. This was heavy. Each step had a weight to it that made the pit of my stomach feel hollow. I looked at my friends. Their faces were still lit up by the fire, smiling. They hadn't heard it yet. The fire was too loud, their laughter drowning it out. I remember feeling a spike of frustration like, how can you not hear that? I held up a hand. Hey guys, shut up for a second. They quieted down, giving me weird looks, and in that silence the sound was unmistakable. The crunching of leaves, the snapping of small branches. It was moving in a wide, slow arc around our campsite. We all froze. The only sound was the fire popping and this thing walking in the dark. My one friend, let's call him Dave because I don't want to use real names, tried to laugh it off. Probably just a bear, man. But his voice was tight. We have bears around here, yeah. But this didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard. Bears don't usually walk in a perfect circle around you. They either run away or come straight for the food. We all stood up, our hot dogs forgotten, starting to burn and stink in the fire. We were peering into the blackness, but you can't see anything out there. The fire just ruins your night vision. It was like staring into a wall of pure black, a wall that was now making noises at us. Then everything changed in a single second. From the direction of this old, beat-up mobile home that was parked on the edge of the property, it had been there for decades, just rotting. There was this unbelievable sound. It wasn't a bang, it was a crunch, a deep, metallic, groaning crunch that was so loud it felt like it punched the air out of my lungs. It was the sound of something huge and solid slamming into the side of that trailer. I swear, we all jumped about a foot in the air. One of my friends actually yelped. For a second, nobody moved. We were just statues staring in the direction of the sound, our hearts hammering against our ribs. My own heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Put out the fire," Dave yelled, and his voice was pure panic. That broke the spell. We started kicking dirt and sand from around the fire pit onto the flames. It was chaos. Embers flew everywhere. Smoke billowed up, stinging our eyes. But we didn't care. The one thing we all knew, without saying a word, was that the fire was making us a target. We were sitting ducks in this little pool of light. As the last of the flames died under the dirt, the darkness rushed in. It was absolute, suffocating blackness. We had one flashlight between us, a big heavy maglite that Dave fumbled for. He clicked it on, and the beam cut a shaky path through the dark. "We need to get to the cottage," I said. my voice a harsh whisper. Another friend was already asleep in the small cottage about 100 yards away. There was no way we were staying out here. We started moving, huddled together like a bunch of scared kids. We were trying to be quiet, but we were crashing through the undergrowth, our feet clumsy with fear. The beam of the flashlight jerked and danced across the ground, the trees never settling anywhere. Every shadow looked like it was moving. We got to the cottage door and started pounding on it, whispering his name as loud as we dared. "Mark! Mark, open up! Now!" The door swung open and Mark was there, bleary-eyed and confused. "What the hell, guys?" We didn't answer, just pushed past him into the one-room cottage, slamming the door shut and throwing the bolt. It was a flimsy lock, one of those simple sliding bolts, but throwing it felt like a monumental act of safety. We were all breathing hard, standing in the dark. The only light was from the flashlight, which Dave was still holding. He pointed it at the floor so we could see a little. "What is going on?" Mark asked, his voice shaky now, feeding off our terror. Before any of us could form a sentence, Dave, who was standing near the one small window, slowly raised the flashlight and shone it out into the night, toward where we'd put the fire out. And that's when we saw it. The beam landed on it, maybe 20 feet from the window. It was standing there, just on the edge of the tree line. It was tall, so damn tall. My brain tried to make it a man, but it wasn't. It was covered in this thick, shaggy, dark hair. It wasn't like a bear's fur. It was stringier, almost like wet, matted hair. Its body was huge through the shoulders, powerful looking, but it was standing on two legs. It was hunched over slightly, with these long, heavy arms hanging down by its sides. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was its eyes. When the flashlight beam hit its face, its eyes glowed. They weren't reflecting the light like a cat's eyes. They were glowing from within, this deep, burning, bloody red. It was a color that didn't belong in the woods, a color that felt wrong, angry. It was like looking into two tiny furnaces. The thing turned its head. It didn't jerk or startle. It was a slow, deliberate turn, and those red eyes fixed right on the window, right on us. I could feel it looking at me. It felt intelligent, not like an animal looking at a threat, but like something that was seeing us, understanding that we were inside, that we were watching it. My whole body went cold. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. I was just frozen, locked onto those 2 points of red light. The air in the cottage was so thick with fear you could taste it, metallic and sour. Then it moved. It didn't run like a human. It dropped down onto its knuckles and its legs in this weird, hunched-over lope, and it just vanished. It was incredibly fast, unbelievably fast. 1 second it was there, the next there was just the shaking beam of the flashlight on empty trees. We heard the sound of it crashing away through the brush, the snapping and cracking fading into the distance until there was nothing. Nobody spoke for a full minute. We just stood there listening to the silence. Then, one by one, we sank to the floor. We didn't turn on any lights. We just sat there in the dark, huddled together, listening. Every single sound that night was a terror. The creak of the cottage settling, the wind in the trees, an owl hooting in the distance. Each one made us jump, made our hearts slam against our ribs all over again. We took turns peering out the window, but we never saw the red eyes again. We just saw the dark. We didn't sleep, not a wink. We just sat on that cold cottage floor, wrapped in our own jackets, waiting for the sun. The night felt like it lasted 1,000 years. When the first grey light of dawn finally started to filter through the window, it felt like a miracle. We waited until the sun was fully up, until we could see clearly, before we dared to unbolt the door and step outside. The world looked normal. Birds were chirping. The air was fresh and cool. It was hard to believe the horror of the night had happened in this same peaceful place. We walked over to the campsite first. Our stuff was scattered. The fire pit was a mess of ash and dirt. It felt like a scene from another lifetime. Then we all looked at each other, and without a word, Walked over to the old mobile home, and there it was. On the aluminum siding, about 6 feet off the ground, was a massive dent. It wasn't a scratch or a scrape. It was a deep, concave crater, like something the size of a refrigerator had been swung into it with tremendous force. The metal was bent inward, the white paint cracked and flaking away around the edges. I reached out and touched it. The metal was cold and hard. It was real. We just stood there, staring at it. That dent was proof. It was the physical evidence that we hadn't all just shared the same nightmare. Something huge, something unbelievably strong, had been out there with us. It had slammed into this trailer with enough force to leave a permanent mark. We packed up our stuff in complete silence. We didn't talk about what we saw. We didn't try to explain it. We just threw everything in the cars and got the hell out of there. We drove back to the city without even stopping for coffee. It's been a few weeks now. We've talked about it a little since then in hushed voices during the day. We all saw the same thing. The tall, hairy body, the hunched run, and those fucking red eyes. I can't go into the woods anymore. Even a city park at dusk makes me nervous. Every time I close my eyes, I see those 2 red points of light staring back at me from the darkness. I hear that metallic crunch. I feel that absolute primal fear that shut down my whole body. We went camping to relax, to get away from everything, and we found something that followed us back. I don't know what it was. I don't use the word lightly, but my mind keeps going to the only thing that fits. And the thought that something like that is out there, something that can look at you with that kind of intelligence and rage and leave a dent in solid metal 6 feet off the ground, that's the part I can't get past. Story 2. Okay, I'll do my best to write this for you. I'm still pretty shaken up even thinking about it, and it's been a while. But here goes nothing. So I was working the graveyard shift at this donut shop on Highway 115 in Florence, Colorado. It's this lonely stretch, you know. Not much out there, especially after midnight. The place is basically a box with fluorescent lights, a coffee machine that's always on the fritz, and the smell of old grease and sugar that gets into your clothes and never really leaves. My co-worker, this older lady who's been there forever, she was in the back doing inventory or something. I was up front, just wiping down counters and trying to stay awake. The clock said it was about 2:45 in the morning. The world outside was dead quiet, just the hum of the freezers and the occasional semi-truck blowing past on the highway. That's when I heard it. Dogs, not just barking, but howling, this intense, frantic sound that cut through the night. It wasn't the usual yapping from someone's backyard. This was different. It came from the direction of the Sand Creek drainage, this wooded area behind the strip of businesses where we are. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up. It was too desperate, like they were scared of something. I remember my heart started beating a little faster, and I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. I walked over to the door, unlocked it, and stepped outside into the cool air. The night was clear, stars out, but dark. The streetlights only reached so far. The howling was louder outside, echoing. It sounded like a whole pack of them, just losing their minds. I stood there for a minute, listening, my skin crawling. It felt wrong. I couldn't see anything, just the dark shapes of the car wash and the storage unit place across the street, and beyond that, the deeper darkness of the trees. I got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, which was stupid because there was nobody out. But the feeling was so strong, I actually looked over my shoulder, back into the lit-up shop, just to make sure everything was okay in there. After a couple of minutes, the howling died down a bit, turning into whimpers and then fading away. The silence that came back was even heavier than before. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to shake it off. I told my co-worker about it when she came out from the back. She just shrugged and said it was probably coyotes or a stray dog getting into something. We both tried to dismiss it, you know. You have to, working these hours. If you let every weird noise get to you, you'd go insane. So we went back to what we were doing. I started prepping for the morning rush that was still hours away, and she went back to her paperwork. The clock ticked over, minute by minute. But the air felt different now, thicker. I kept glancing out the big front window, into the darkness. My ears were straining for any sound, but it was quiet, too quiet. Maybe 25 minutes later, I was in the middle of counting out change for the register when my co-worker shouted my name from the front. Not a normal call, but this sharp, panicked, "Get out here now!" I dropped the coins. They scattered all over the floor, and I ran to the front. She was standing frozen, pointing out the window, her face pale as flour. "Look," was all she could say, her voice a tight whisper. I followed her finger and my blood went cold. There, under the glow of a streetlight, maybe 100 feet down the road, was a figure. It was just walking down the street, but it wasn't a person. It was huge. I mean, massive. It was covered in hair, this thick, shaggy, reddish-brown hair. It was walking on two legs, but its posture was all wrong. It was hunched forward, powerful looking, with these enormous shoulders. There was no neck that I could see. Its head just seemed to sit right on top of those broad shoulders. The thing that made my brain stutter was its size. It was walking past a 6 or 7 foot tall chain link fence that runs along the side of the road. Its shoulders were level with the top of that fence. Level. I'm 5'10", and that fence towers over me. This thing was a giant. It moved with a kind of heavy, deliberate stride, not fast, but with a purpose. It wasn't shuffling or stumbling, it was just walking, like it owned the night. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, my hands pressed against the cold glass of the window, watching this thing move through the pool of light. My mind was screaming, trying to find a box to put it in. A bear? No. Bears don't walk like that, and they aren't that tall or that color. A guy in a suit, that was even more ridiculous. This was real, living flesh and blood under that streetlight. I could see the way its muscles moved under the matted hair, the way its arms swung. And then, I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of my brain was still trying to rationalize, to make it human. I unlocked the door, pushed it open just a crack, and I called out. My voice was weak, shaky. "Hey!" It stopped. Not its body. Its body kept walking, one foot in front of the other, but its head turned. It turned its head and looked right at me. That was the moment. That was the terror moment that is burned into the back of my eyes forever. Its face wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't an ape's face. It was just a face. Dark, deep-set eyes that caught the light. There was no expression, no anger, no curiosity. It was just a look. A direct, penetrating look straight at me from across that dark street. It felt ancient and intelligent and completely alien. A chill, like a shard of ice, shot straight down my spine and rooted me to the spot. My legs felt like water. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. It held my gaze for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. Then, without breaking its stride, it turned its head back forward and kept walking. It passed out of the streetlight's glow, its huge form becoming a darker shadow against the dark, moving past the car wash, past the storage units, and then it was just gone, swallowed by the darkness leading toward the Sand Creek drainage. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door and locking it, my hands trembling so bad I could barely turn the deadbolt. My co-worker was just staring at me, her eyes wide with pure fear. We didn't say a word. What was there to say? We both saw it. We both knew what we saw. The air in the shop was electric with panic. I felt nauseous. I leaned against the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. The smell of coffee and donuts, usually so comforting, now just made me feel sick. We just stood there in silence for maybe 10 minutes, not moving, just listening. The world outside was silent again, eerily silent. No more dogs, no more anything. Then headlights. A car pulled into the lot. It was the paper delivery guy, right on time. He's this older fella, always cheerful, but when he came in, he looked spooked. His face was pale, and he was clutching his bundle of papers like a lifeline. "You guys hear anything weird out there?" he asked, his voice unsteady. We just nodded, not trusting ourselves to speak. He told us that when he was driving past the old abandoned auto body shop down the road, he heard something inside. He said it wasn't an animal sound. It was a low, guttural something, a growl, but deeper. He said it sounded big, and it scared him so bad, he just hit the gas and came straight here. He said the sound made the hair on his neck stand up. Hearing him say that, confirming that we weren't the only ones, just made everything more real and 1,000 times worse. Not 5 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up, lights off. The officer who got out, I knew him. He came in sometimes for coffee. He was a big, calm guy, never seemed fazed by anything, but when he walked in, he looked rattled. His uniform was neat, as always, but his hands were shaking. He came up to the counter, and I could see the confusion and fear in his eyes. He started asking if we'd seen or heard anything unusual. His voice was tight. As he was talking, he went to pick up the coffee mug I'd automatically poured for him, and his hand jerked. He spilled coffee all over the counter. He just stared at the brown puddle spreading, and then he looked back at us, and his face was a mask of someone trying very hard to stay professional while freaking out on the inside. He said he'd gotten a call about possible trespassing or a disturbance in the area, and he'd driven around. He admitted he'd heard things, crashing sounds from the drainage area, like something big moving through the brush. But when we asked him if he saw anything, he got this closed-off look. He said, no, didn't see anything specific. But the way he said it, the way he couldn't meet our eyes, told a different story. He knew he'd seen or heard something that had scared him. A cop, badly enough to make him spill his coffee. He finished his questions quickly, almost abruptly, told us to be careful and call if we saw anything else. And then he left. The paper guy left right after him, not even sticking around for his usual chat. After they were gone, the silence in the shop came back, heavier than ever. My co-worker and I didn't talk about it. We didn't say, "What was that thing?" or "Did you see its eyes?" We just went through the motions. I mopped up the spilled coffee. She went back to the back. We avoided looking at each other. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, it couldn't be real. But it was real. We had all felt it. The delivery guy, the cop, us. A shared, unspoken terror that hung in the air until the sun finally started to come up. When my shift ended and I walked out to my car in the early morning light, everything looked normal. The street, the fence, the car wash. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis, and I was the only one who knew it. I drove home with all my doors locked, checking my rearview mirror the whole way. I never saw it again. I quit that job a couple of weeks later. I couldn't stand being out there in the dark anymore. To this day, if I hear dogs howling at night, my heart starts to race. And sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I see it. That huge, hairy shape under the streetlight. The effortless walk. And I feel again that icy chill as it turns its head and looks straight at me. I can't explain it. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, and I know it saw me too. Story 3. That morning, I was up way before the sun. I remember the alarm on my phone buzzing on the nightstand, and I shut it off quick so I wouldn't wake my wife. It was cold, that deep, penetrating cold that seeps into your bones before you even get out of bed. I pulled on my layers, thermal underwear, a heavy flannel shirt, my old camo pants that are worn soft at the knees. I remember the specific weight of my boots as I laced them up, the familiar squeak of the floorboards in the hallway. I grabbed my rifle, a .30-06 I've had for years, and my day pack with water, some jerky, and my gear. The air outside was so still and quiet, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. The drive to the trailhead was dark and familiar. My truck's headlights cut through the black, picking out the fence posts and the pine trees lining the road. I had the heater on full blast, the fan whirring, and the smell of old coffee from the travel mug in the cup holder filled the cab. I parked at the usual pullout, the one just before the Lolo Pass Visitor Center. The engine ticked as it cooled down, the only sound besides the thud of my door closing. I remember looking up at the sky. No stars. Just a thick, woolly blanket of fog that had settled deep into the valleys. It wasn't unusual for September, but this felt different. It was heavier, wetter. It felt like walking into a cold, damp room. I started hiking in, using my headlamp. The beam of light just bounced back at me in the fog, illuminating the mist in a weird, glowing cone. I couldn't see more than 15, 20 feet ahead. The trail was a familiar one, a game trail that follows a steep drainage down into a basin where the elk like to bed down. The ground was soft, with a thick layer of pine needles and damp earth. My boots made almost no sound. That's the first thing that was off. Normally, even stepping quietly, you hear the crunch of a twig, the rustle of leaves. But everything was muffled, like the forest was wrapped in cotton. I hiked for about an hour, descending deeper into the drainage. The fog didn't lift, it just got thicker. My jacket was beaded with moisture, and my face was wet and cold. I decided it was a good time to start cow calling. I found a spot off the trail, behind a big Douglas fir with shaggy bark, and I put my rifle down against the tree. I took out my diaphragm call from the little plastic case in my pocket. It's a weird feeling, putting that latex reed in your mouth. It tastes like plastic and spit. I did a sequence of calls, a few soft mews, trying to sound like a relaxed cow elk. I waited. Silence. The kind of silence that's not just an absence of sound, but an active thing. It was pressing in on my eardrums. I called again, a little louder, a contact call, and that's when I got an answer. But it wasn't right. It wasn't the high, whistling bugle of a bull elk or the softer mew of a cow. This was wrong. It was deeper, much deeper. It was rough, like gravel being ground together in a metal bucket. And it wasn't a call of curiosity or a challenge. It sounded angry. It was a short, guttural burst that seemed to come from down in the bottom of the drainage, maybe a couple 100 yards away. It didn't echo the way an elk's call does in a canyon. It was just absorbed by the fog. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the cold. My first thought was bear, a grizzly, but I've heard grizzlies huff and woof, and this wasn't that. This was a vocalization. A word doesn't feel right, but it was a deliberate sound. I stood there, frozen behind the tree, my heart starting to thump hard against my ribs. I didn't call again. I just listened, and that's when I felt it. A heavy, rhythmic thump coming up through the soles of my boots. It was a vibration in the ground, a slow, deliberate boom, boom, boom. It wasn't my heart. This was outside of me. It was something big, and it was walking. Each step sent a jolt through the earth that traveled up my legs. I could feel the pine needles on the forest floor trembling with each impact. My mouth went dry. I remember licking my lips and tasting the bitter plastic of the elk call still in my mouth. I spat it out into my hand, my fingers trembling. The footsteps were getting closer, not fast but steady, and they were heavy. I've been close to a bull moose before, and this was heavier. This was the kind of weight that shakes the ground. The fog was so thick I couldn't see anything, just the grey wall and the dark shapes of the nearest trees. The silence was still there, but now it was a silence built around this one sound, this one feeling of something massive moving through the mist towards me. I slowly, so slowly it felt like my joints were rusted shut, reached down and picked up my rifle. The cold metal of the stock was a shock against my cheek. I flipped the safety off. The tiny click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. I pressed my back against the rough bark of the Douglas fir, trying to make myself small. The footsteps stopped, For maybe 10 seconds there was nothing, just my own ragged breathing, which I tried to stifle. The fog swirled, and then a shape began to form in the grey. It was tall, so damn tall. It emerged from the fog not like it was walking through it, but like the fog was parting for it. It was over 9 feet tall, easy. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, sloping down to long, thick arms that hung past its knees. It was covered in hair, dark and matted, wet from the fog, almost black. It wasn't like a bear's fur, it was stringier, like a wet Irish setter, but coarser. It stopped, maybe 40 yards away, just standing there in the middle of the game trail, and it turned its head. Its eyes. I will never ever forget its eyes. They weren't reflective like a deer's or a bear's. They were a solid, bright amber color like old honey, and they were fixed right on me. There was no doubt. It knew exactly where I was, hidden behind that tree. There was an intelligence in that look that I can't describe. It wasn't the dumb curiosity of an animal. It was a cold, ancient, knowing look. It was assessing me. My whole body went rigid with a fear so pure, it felt like ice water had been poured into my veins. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared back into those amber eyes. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a roar. It was raw. It was a furious, screaming bellow that seemed to tear right out of its chest. It was so loud it wasn't just a sound I heard. It was a physical force. I felt it in my chest. A deep vibration that made my teeth rattle. The sound echoed through the drainage, but it was a flat, dead echo, swallowed by the fog. The smell hit me a second later. It was a wave of stench, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something rotten, mixed with the thick, coppery smell of old meat and damp, decaying earth. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach clench. It took a step forward. One long, deliberate step. Its foot was huge, and it sank deep into the soft ground. I could see the muscles in its legs and shoulders bunching under that dark, wet hair. That's when I slipped. My boot on the wet pine needles and slick clay just went out from under me. I fell backward, hard, my rifle clattering away from me into the brush. The world tilted, and for a horrible second I was looking up at the grey sky through the pine branches. Then I scrambled onto my back, and it was there, towering over me. It felt like the sky had gone dark. It blocked out everything. It loomed, and that's the only word for it. It loomed. It was so much bigger up close. I could see the individual, coarse hairs on its chest, the powerful curve of its neck. Its amber eyes were burning down at me. It bellowed again, leaning its head down towards me, and this time it was deafening. It was a shockwave of pure noise and foul air that blasted over me. My ears started ringing instantly. A high-pitched whine that I can still sometimes hear if a room is too quiet. Terror, real terror, is not a thought. It's a physical reaction. My bladder let go. Warmth spread through my pants, a humiliating primal sign of how utterly my body had given up. I was scrambling backward on my hands and heels, my boots digging uselessly into the mud, putting no distance between us at all. My hand fumbled at my hip for my bear spray. It was in a holster on my belt. My fingers were so numb and clumsy, I could barely get the safety clip off. I finally got it, my thumb finding the trigger. The thing was still standing over me, its chest rumbling with a low growl that I felt more than heard. I pointed the canister up and pressed the trigger. A cloud of red, oily pepper spray shot out, hitting it square in the chest and face. It did not run. It did not even flinch back. It enraged it. The bellow that followed the spray was something else entirely. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated fury. It was the sound of something that had never been challenged and was now insulted to its core. It swung one of those long tree trunk arms. It wasn't even aiming at me. It swung at a young pine tree next to it, a tree maybe 8 inches thick. The sound was a sickening crack thwump. It wasn't like an axe hitting wood. It was a single explosive impact. The tree didn't fall over. It just snapped in half. The top 10 feet of it whipped through the air and crashed down through the branches nearby, sending a shower of bark and splinters everywhere. A piece of wood hit my cheek, stinging like a wasp. The sheer, brutal power of it was paralyzing. It had just destroyed a tree with one hand, like it was a twig. I stared, dumbfounded, at the raw, white splinters of the broken trunk. That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to die. The rifle was gone. The bear spray had made it worse. There was nothing left. It turned its head back to me, its amber eyes now streaming from the pepper spray, but it didn't seem blinded. It seemed even more focused, more hateful. I don't know what instinct took over. I just rolled. I rolled as fast as I could, through the wet ferns and mud, towards a big fallen log I'd noticed earlier. It was an old cedar, moss-covered and rotting in places, but it was big. I scrambled behind it, pressing my body into the damp, earthy hollow beneath it. The smell of rotting wood and wet moss filled my nose. I curled into a ball, making myself as small as possible, my face pressed into the cold, wet leaves. I was shaking so hard I was vibrating. My ears were still ringing, and I could hear my own blood pounding in my head. I could hear it moving on the other side of the log, the heavy thump, thump, thump of its footsteps. It was pacing back and forth. I could hear its deep, ragged breathing like a bellows. I could hear the low, rumbling growl in its throat. It knew I was there. It was just on the other side of that log. I could feel the vibrations of its steps through the ground. I remember a specific detail. A fat, black beetle crawled over my thumb where it was dug into the soil. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. It paced for what felt like an hour. It might have been 2 minutes. Time had stopped making sense. The fog was still there, thick and unmoving. The forest was still dead silent except for this thing, this monster just a few feet away from me. Then the footsteps stopped. The growling stopped. The heavy breathing faded. I stayed there frozen for a long, long time. I don't know how long. The cold from the ground seeped into my bones. My wet pants were freezing against my skin. Eventually, the ringing in my ears faded enough that I could hear the normal forest sounds slowly start to return. A chickadee called somewhere far away. The wind sighed through the tops of the pines, though I couldn't feel it down where I was. I slowly, ever so slowly, raised my head and peered over the top of the log. Nothing. The drainage was empty. The fog was still there, but the shape was gone. The broken pine tree was there, a stark white wound in the gloom. The smell was fading, replaced by the normal scent of wet forest. I didn't stand up. I crawled. I crawled away from that log, back in the direction I thought I'd come from. I found my rifle lying in the salal bushes. I grabbed it, my hand so numb I could barely feel the grip. I didn't look back. I got to my feet and I started walking, then jogging, then full-on running, scrambling back up the steep trail I'd come down. I slipped and fell, scraping my hands and knees on rocks, but I just got up and kept running. I didn't stop until I burst out of the trees and saw my truck sitting in the pullout, the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. I fumbled the keys, dropped them twice before I got the door open. I threw my rifle into the passenger seat and climbed in, locking the doors. I sat there for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My ears were still ringing, my hands were trembling so bad I couldn't even turn the key. I just sat there, in the quiet of the truck cab, staring at the tree line, expecting that massive dark shape to come walking out of the fog at any second. I eventually got the truck started and drove home. I didn't tell my wife what happened, not the real story. I just said I'd had a bad scare with a bear and fell in the mud. I took a shower that felt like it lasted forever, scrubbing at my skin, but I couldn't get the smell of that thing out of my nose for days. A week or so later, I was having a beer with a buddy of mine, another hunter. I didn't give him details, but I mentioned I'd had a weird experience up in that specific drainage near Lolo. He got quiet, then he told me he'd heard stories from other guys about that same area, about things that didn't sound like elk, about the forest going dead quiet, about a feeling of being watched by something that wasn't a bear. He said, most people just don't talk about it. I went back up there once, about a year later. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself it was real. I parked in the same spot. I didn't even get my rifle out of the truck. I just walked to the edge of the tree line, and the feeling hit me immediately. That same heavy, oppressive feeling, that same dead silence. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I turned around, got back in my truck, and I've never gone back. It's been years now. I still hunt, but I stick to different areas. I never use a cow call anymore. And sometimes, when I'm in the woods and the fog rolls in, or the forest goes quiet for a little too long, I feel that old fear crawl up my spine. I see those amber eyes in my mind, that ancient, fearless intelligence staring out from a face that shouldn't exist. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. I just know what I saw, what I felt, what I smelled, and I know that for one horrifying moment in the fog, it saw me, and it was angry. Story 4. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing the way it does sometimes, even years after getting back. I was a Marine, did deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. You see things over there, you hear things, and some of it never really leaves you. It gets stored away in a box in the back of your head, but the lid doesn't always stay shut. So, around 2 in the morning, I gave up on trying to sleep and slipped out of bed. My wife was sound asleep beside me, dead to the world. I remember being careful not to wake her as I padded through the dark house. The back deck is a simple wooden structure, a few steps up from the backyard. The wood was cool under my bare feet. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. I lit a cigarette, the flare of the match blinding for a second in the absolute darkness. I leaned against the railing, looking out into the wall of trees. It was pitch black out there. You couldn't see more than 10 feet into the tree line. I took a drag, the smoke burning my lungs in a familiar, almost comforting way. This was my routine, a little moment of peace in the dead of night. And then it started. It wasn't a gradual thing. It didn't build up. 1 second there was that heavy silence, and the next, a sound ripped through it that froze me solid. My cigarette stopped halfway to my lips. It was a howl, but it wasn't a dog or a coyote or anything I'd ever heard in my life. This was deep, powerful. It felt like it came from a chest the size of a barrel. It wasn't high-pitched or yipping. It was a low, guttural roar that rolled into a long, drawn-out howl. It echoed through the woods, vibrating in the air around me, and I felt it in my bones, in my teeth. My first instinct, trained into me from my time overseas, was to identify it. My brain started flipping through a catalogue of sounds. Bear? No wolf? We don't have wolves in Georgia. A big cat? It was too sustained, too vocal. This was a life-filled sound, something with intention behind it. It wasn't a noise of pain or a mating call. It felt declarative, like it was announcing its presence. The howl stopped. The silence that rushed back in was even heavier than before, now charged with this new, terrible energy. I stood there, completely still, barely breathing. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I counted in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I got to 15, exactly 15 seconds after the first one ended. The second howl came. It was the same, that same deep, resonant, powerful vocalization. It lasted for about 5 seconds. It was so loud, so clear, it felt like the thing was just on the other side of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the darkness, but there was nothing. Just blackness. My mind, still trying to be rational, started throwing out stupid explanations. A truck's air brakes on a distant highway. No, the sound was too organic, too alive. It had a texture to it, a roughness in the lower register that machinery doesn't have. A generator? That was even more ridiculous. This wasn't a mechanical hum. This was a living creature projecting its voice across the forest. The third howl came. Again, exactly 15 seconds after the last one. My cigarette had burned down to the filter, the ash a long, precarious column. I hadn't moved a muscle. The heat from the ember finally reached my fingers and I flinched, dropping it onto the deck. I didn't even look down. My entire focus was on those woods. This went on. Howl. 15 seconds of silence. Howl. It was relentless. Methodical. It wasn't random. It was a pattern, and that made it 10 times worse. An animal in distress doesn't do that. An animal making a territorial call might, but this felt intelligent. The precision of the timing was unnerving. It was like listening to a metronome of pure dread. I'd been in firefights. I'd known fear, the kind of fear that tastes like copper in your mouth and makes your hands shake so bad you can barely hold your rifle. This was different. This was a primal fear. It was the fear our ancestors must have felt sitting around a fire, listening to something big and unknown moving in the dark. This fear bypassed all my training, all my modern rationality, and went straight to the lizard part of my brain that just screamed, danger. The adrenaline was coursing through me now, that familiar chemical rush. My senses were heightened. I could hear the faint creak of the house settling. I could feel every splinter of the deckwood under my feet. I could smell the lingering scent of my burnt cigarette and the damp, earthy smell of the Georgia night, but all of it was drowned out by that sound. I must have listened to it for 5 minutes, howl after howl after howl. Each one was identical in length and tone, each one separated by that same 15-second gap. It never wavered. It never got closer or farther away. It was just there, a constant, terrifying feature of the night. Finally, my legs decided to work. I took a step back, then another. I couldn't stay out there. The feeling of being exposed on that deck was overwhelming. I fumbled for the sliding glass door, my hand, slick with sweat, and slid it open just enough to slip inside. I closed it as quietly as I could, my eyes never leaving the window that looked out onto the deck and the woods beyond. I engaged the lock. The soft click felt pathetic, a meaningless gesture against whatever was out there. I stood in the dark living room, my back against the cool wall, just listening. The howls continued. 15 seconds, howl. 15 seconds, howl. They were muffled now by the glass, but they were still clear, still powerful enough to vibrate the window pane slightly. I could feel the vibrations through the wall. I needed to know what it was. I had to. My laptop was on the coffee table. I moved to it, my movements jerky, and opened it. The screen lit up the room with a cold blue light. My hands were trembling as I typed. I don't even remember what I searched for first. Strange animal sounds, Georgia. Deep Howl, Paulding County. The results were mostly junk. Then I remembered the Pickett's Mill battlefield was nearby. I'd heard stories, local legends, but I'd always dismissed them as just that, stories. I added Pickett's Mill to the search, and that's when I found it. A forum. Something about strange encounters. There was a thread with audio files. People were describing sounds exactly like what I was hearing. My heart was in my throat. I clicked on one from a user in Ohio. I turned the volume down low so as not to wake my wife, and I hit play, and my blood ran cold. It was the same sound, the exact same deep, guttural, powerful howl, the same duration, the same tonal quality. It was a perfect match. A comment below the audio file simply said, "That's a Sasquatch." I sat there, in my mom's quiet living room, with that single word echoing in my head. Sasquatch, Bigfoot. All the rational explanations I'd been clinging to, the trucks, the generators, a sick bear, evaporated. They were gone. This was something else. This was the thing from the legends, the thing you see on cheesy TV shows, and it was outside, right now. I played the audio again, and this time A full-body shudder racked me. My skin crawled. It was a physical sensation, like 1,000 ants marching over my arms and back. It was the feeling of a fundamental truth being rewritten. I had heard of Bigfoot. There was no other explanation that fit. The precision, the power, the sheer otherness of the sound. It all clicked into place with a terrible, final certainty. I must have made a noise, a sharp intake of breath, because my wife stirred on the couch. She lifted her head, her voice groggy with sleep. "Honey, what's wrong? You're shaking." I looked at my hands. They were trembling violently. I closed the laptop lid, cutting off the blue light, plunging the room back into near darkness. The howls had stopped. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the sound had been. How long had they been quiet? I hadn't even noticed. "I'm okay," I lied, my voice rough. "Just couldn't sleep. Heard some weird noises outside." She mumbled something and settled back into the pillows, asleep again in seconds. I stayed on the floor, my back against the couch, staring at the dark shape of the sliding glass door. I felt stripped bare. All my training, all my combat experience, all my sense of being a capable man, it meant nothing. I had been terrified by a sound, just a sound, and then a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was in Afghanistan, sitting on a guard post with another Marine, a guy from the Pacific Northwest. We were talking about home, about the woods there. He was a big hunter, a tracker. He told me, completely serious, that there were things in the deep forests of America that nobody talked about. He said his grandfather, a logger, had seen one once, a huge hairy man-thing that moved through the trees without a sound. He said they could scream in a way that would freeze your blood. At the time, I'd laughed it off. I thought he was just telling ghost stories to pass the time. Now, sitting on my mother's floor, I knew he wasn't. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, listening to the nothingness. The normal night sounds never returned. No crickets, no owls. It was as if every other living thing in those woods had been scared into silence, just like me. The sun eventually came up, bleaching the world in a pale grey light. I went outside, my whole body tense. The deck was just a deck. The woods were just woods. There were no giant footprints, no broken branches, no proof of anything. It was just a quiet Georgia morning. But I knew what I had heard. That was over a decade ago. I've never heard it again. I've gone back to my mom's house many times, even stood on that same deck at 2 in the morning. But it's never been anything but quiet. I've read every account I can find, listened to every supposed recording, the ones from Ohio, from Pennsylvania, from up in the Pacific Northwest. They all have that same sound, that same specific, terrifying howl. I don't talk about it much. People would think I'm crazy. My wife knows I was badly shaken that night, but I don't think she ever understood the depth of it. How do you explain that a sound made you question your entire understanding of the world? That for 5 minutes you were a primitive man, huddled in the dark, afraid of a monster? I'm a Marine. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, what I can prove. But I can't prove this. All I have is the memory of that sound, burned into my brain, the deep, powerful 15-second interval howl that came from the woods behind my mother's house in late August 2011, and the cold, skin-crawling certainty that I was listening to something that wasn't supposed to be real, something that should have stayed in the shadows of stories and legends, but it didn't. For 5 minutes, it was real, and I heard it. Story 5. All right, I'll just type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe it, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out of my head. It's been stuck in there, playing over and over for what feels like forever now. My hands are still a little shaky even thinking about it. So I'm a cop. Have been for 15 years. You see a lot of weird stuff in this job. Stuff that never makes the news. Domestic disputes that turn surreal. Accidents that don't make any sense. Just the general weirdness people get up to. You think you've seen it all. You get a sort of thick skin, a way of looking at things that's just facts and procedure. It keeps you sane, but this shattered all of that. It was a Tuesday night. I remember that much. Not that it matters, but it sticks in my head. A slow night. The kind where you're just driving around, drinking bad coffee, hoping nothing happens, but also kinda hoping something does just to break the monotony. Me and my partner, we'd been together for about 3 years at that point. We had a good rhythm. We didn't need to talk much to know what the other was thinking. The call came over the radio just after 10 p.m. possible break-in at a hunting cabin way out on the edge of the county, about 10 miles from the last streetlight in town. The owner, a guy named Richard, was out of state. A neighbor who lived a mile down the valley said they'd seen a flickering light up near the cabin earlier and thought they should report it. Probably kids, we figured, or a squatter. It's happened before. These remote places attract folks who want to be left alone, for good or bad reasons. We took the cruiser, the one with the good off-road tires. The drive out there was pitch black. No moon that night. Our headlights were the only things cutting through the darkness, just these 2 pools of light on a dirt road that got narrower and more rutted the further we went. The trees closed in on both sides, their branches scraping against the sides of the car like long bony fingers. You could hear the gravel pinging underneath the chassis. It was cold too, the kind of cold that seeps into the car no matter how high you crank the heat. My partner was driving. We didn't talk much, just the crackle of the radio every now and then, the hum of the engine. We were both just watching the woods, the way you do out there. It's not a comfortable feeling. The forest at night feels different, alive in a way that isn't friendly. It feels like it's watching you back. After what felt like an age, we saw the turnoff for the cabin. We killed the headlights about 100 yards out and rolled to a stop, the engine ticking as it cooled. The silence was immediate and absolute. It was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. We got out, closing the doors as softly as we could. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. We used our flashlights, the big mag lights. The beams cut through the dark, swinging across the front of the cabin. It was a simple A-frame, looked old, no lights on inside, no car parked out front, nothing. We did a slow walk around the perimeter, no broken windows, the front door was closed, no signs of forced entry at all. I remember feeling a little stupid, probably a false alarm. The neighbor saw a reflection off a window or something. It happens. My partner tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. He looked at me. I nodded. We drew our service weapons. Standard procedure. You never know what's on the other side of a door. He pushed it open and it swung inward with a low creak. That's when the smell hit us. It wasn't just a smell, it was a physical presence. It was this thick, heavy, musky odor, like wet dog, but mixed with something else. Something earthy, like damp soil and old leaves. It was so strong it made the back of my throat itch. It was the kind of smell that feels like it coats the inside of your nose. I'll never forget that smell. It's burned into my memory. We stepped inside, our flashlight beams dancing around the single room, and that's when we saw the state of the place. It was ransacked, completely torn apart. A wooden table was flipped on its side, chairs were splintered, a small bookshelf was toppled over, its contents, old paperbacks, hunting magazines, some maps, scattered all over the floor. Cushions from a small couch were ripped open, white stuffing leaking out like guts. It wasn't a neat search. It was violent. It was chaos. It looked like a fight had happened, a big one, but there was no blood. Just destruction. We moved further in, sweeping our lights across the room. The beam from my light passed over the stone fireplace, the little kitchenette, the overturned furniture, and then it passed over the far corner, the one deepest in shadow, and it stopped, because something was there. At first, my brain didn't want to process it. It was just a big, dark shape, hunched over, blending into the shadows. I thought it was a pile of old blankets or a rolled-up carpet. But then I saw the texture. It was covered in hair. dark, matted brown fur with these coarse grey streaks running through it, like it was old or sick. My light stayed on it. I couldn't look away. And then I heard it. A breath. A deep, low, rumbling breath. The kind of breath a large animal takes when it's sleeping, but this wasn't sleep, it was too aware. The sound vibrated in my chest. It was a sound you feel more than you hear. My partner's light swung over and joined mine, illuminating the corner fully, and that's when I saw it. Really saw it. It was huge. It was sitting on its haunches, its back to the wall, its long arms wrapped around its knees. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like a powerlifter's. The arms were long, too long and thick with muscle under that dark fur. Its head was down, but as the light hit its face, it began to lift. I saw a heavy, sloping brow, and beneath that, its mouth was partly open, and I saw its teeth. They were human-like. Not like a bear's fangs. They were flat, like molars, but big. Stained and set in a jaw that looked like it could crush bone. That's the detail that really got me, that made my blood run cold. The humanness of the teeth in that utterly non-human face. Then it moved. It didn't jerk or startle. It uncoiled. It pushed itself up from the floor, and it just kept rising. It was slow, deliberate, powerful. The top of its head brushed against the 8-foot ceiling. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was a wall of muscle and fur and pure primal mass. It turned its head and looked right at me. I can't describe its eyes. They were dark, deep-set, but they held an intelligence. It wasn't the blank stare of a startled deer or the simple aggression of a bear. This was a knowing look, a calculating look. It saw me. It saw my partner. It understood what we were. My training kicked in, a thin automatic layer over a bedrock of pure animal terror. My brain was screaming, a high-pitched whine of, "What is that? What is that? What is that?" My hand, which had been holding my weapon at a low ready position, jerked upwards. My finger found the trigger guard. I was going to shoot. I don't know if it was the right thing to do, but in that moment, it was the only thing my body knew how to do. The creature's chest swelled, its lips pulled back from those terrifying teeth, and it growled. It wasn't a sound from a movie. It wasn't a roar. It was this low, guttural, rumbling vibration that started in its chest and seemed to shake the whole cabin. The floorboards trembled under my feet. The sound was so deep it felt like it was rearranging my organs. It was a sound of pure warning, a sound that said, "Don't." Then it moved. It didn't run away from us. It lunged past us, towards the back door. The speed was unbelievable. 1 second it was a statue in the corner, the next it was a blur of dark motion. It wasn't clumsy, it was fluid and terrifyingly fast. It didn't bother with the doorknob. It just hit the door. The sound was a cannon shot in the small space. The wooden door, frame and all, exploded outward. Splinters of wood and pieces of the metal latch flew everywhere. It didn't open the door. It deleted the door from existence. The force of it was so violent I felt the air pressure change. A sharp whoomp that hit me in the chest. And then it was gone. Just like that. The cabin was silent again, except for the frantic thumping of my own heart and my partner's ragged breathing. The cold night air rushed in through the new, gaping hole where the back door used to be. We stood there for a full minute, maybe more, just frozen. Our flashlights were shaking so badly the beams were jittering all over the destroyed room. The smell of wet fur and earth was still there, thick and choking. I slowly lowered my weapon, my arm feeling like lead. My partner did the same. We didn't say a word. We just looked at each other. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a shock I knew was mirrored on my own face. We eventually moved, our steps slow and cautious towards the back. We shone our lights out into the darkness. Nothing, just the black wall of the forest. We looked down at the ground just outside the shattered doorframe. There, in the soft, wet soil, were footprints. They were huge, I mean massive, longer than my boot and twice as wide. The shape was humanoid, a clear heel, a ball, 5 toes, but it was all wrong. The proportions were off. They were deep too. Whatever made them was heavy, unbelievably heavy. I saw a few strands of dark, coarse hair caught on a splintered piece of the doorframe. I didn't touch them. I just looked. We searched the area for another 20 minutes, but our hearts weren't in it. We were just going through the motions. We both knew we weren't going to find it, and we both knew we didn't want to. We got back in the car. The drive back to town was completely silent. No radio, no talking. Just the sound of the tires on the gravel and the heater blowing stale air. We got back to the station, parked the car and went inside. We didn't write a report. We didn't log the call. We just looked at each other one more time, a silent agreement passing between us, and went our separate ways. What would we have said? Responded to a call, found an 8-foot-tall, hairy man-beast that ripped a door off its hinges and ran into the woods. We'd have been laughed out of the department. At best, we'd be put on desk duty for psychological evaluation. At worst, we'd lose our jobs, our credibility, everything, so we buried it. We never spoke about it again. Not to each other, not to our wives, not to anyone. But I think about it every day. I see those eyes in my dreams. I smell that wet fur smell sometimes when I'm out in the woods on a call, and my heart just seizes up. 15 years on the force. I've faced down armed suspects. I've been in car chases. I've seen things that would make most people sick. But I have never, ever been as terrified as I was in that cabin. I looked at something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every bit of logic and training I had. And it looked back at me. I know what I saw. I don't have a name for it. I don't need one. I just know that for one terrifying moment, in a dark cabin 10 miles from nowhere, the world became a much bigger, much stranger, and much, much scarier place than I ever thought possible. And I can't explain it. I can't explain any of it. I just have to live with it. Story 6. It was a Tuesday night, I think. Doesn't really matter, but it was one of those late evenings where the air gets thick and heavy, like you're breathing through a wet blanket. I'd been out helping a buddy with some hauling work over in Trenton, and I was heading back home to my place just outside Chiefland. I drive a lifted Ford F-250. It's my baby. Got it set up for off-roading and hauling, nothing fancy, but it's reliable as hell. That night, I was cruising along County Road 341, which is this narrow, kinda lonely stretch that cuts through some serious swampland. It's not a road you take for fun. It's dark, winding, and most folks avoid it after sundown unless they have to. But I've driven it plenty of times, so I know it like the back of my hand. The truck was humming along at about 50 miles per hour. I remember glancing at the speedometer right before it happened because I was keeping an eye out for deer. The headlights were cutting through the darkness, but it was one of those moonless nights where the trees just swallow the light whole. On either side of the road, it's nothing but dense cypress swamps, waterlogged and creepy, with Spanish moss hanging down like dirty curtains. You can hear frogs croaking and insects buzzing, but beyond that, it's dead quiet most of the time. That night, though, everything felt heavier, like the swamp was holding its breath. I was coming up on this little bridge that crosses over a murky creek. It's maybe 20 feet long, nothing major, but it's a spot where the road dips and the trees crowd in close. As I started across the bridge, something moved in the corner of my eye to the right. At first, I thought it was a deer bolting out, but then I saw it clearly under the headlights, and my brain just froze. This thing was huge, way bigger than any deer or bear I've ever seen. It was tall, like 7 or 8 feet easy, and covered in thick, shaggy hair that looked reddish-brown in the light. It was running on 2 legs, fast as hell, sprinting straight across the road from one side of the swamp to the other. I didn't have time to swerve or hit the brakes. It all happened in a split second. One moment I'm driving, the next there's this massive shape barreling into my path. I slammed into it dead on with the front bumper. The impact was brutal. It felt like hitting a concrete wall. The whole truck jolted, and I heard this sickening thud, like a bag of wet sand exploding. My body jerked forward against the seatbelt and the steering wheel vibrated in my hands. For a second, I thought I'd blown a tire or something, but then I saw it. The thing tumbling and rolling off to the left shoulder, disappearing into the darkness beyond the headlights. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. The truck rolled to a stop, and I just sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath. The engine was still running, and the headlights were shining into the swamp, but I couldn't see anything moving out there. Everything was dead quiet again, like the impact had scared all the noise away. I knew I had to get out and check. Part of me didn't want to. I was terrified of what I might find, but another part was screaming that I'd just hit something, and I needed to make sure it wasn't suffering or something. So I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the night air. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was heavy and foul, like rotten eggs mixed with wet dog and something else I can't even describe. Metallic, almost like old blood and dirt. It clung to the air, thick enough that I could taste it in the back of my throat. I shined the flashlight around where I thought the thing had landed. The ground was soft and muddy near the shoulder, perfect for leaving tracks or drag marks. But there was nothing. No blood, no fur, no signs of struggle, just a patch of disturbed leaves and mud, like something had rolled through, but no clear prints. I walked over to the front of my truck, and that's when the reality of it all sunk in. The bumper was cracked right in the middle, and the grille was bent inward like I'd hit something solid. There was this oily, dark smear on the lower part of the grille, kind of greasy to the touch, and it smelled even worse up close. That same foul odor, but stronger, like it had soaked into the metal. I kept scanning the area with the flashlight, my pulse racing. The swamp around me felt alive, like eyes were watching from the shadows. I could hear the water sloshing softly, and every little rustle in the bushes made me jump. I walked a few feet into the tree line, but it was too dense to see much, and I wasn't about to go deeper. That's when it hit me. Whatever I hit, it was gone, vanished. No trail, no sound, nothing, and that's what scared me the most. If it was a deer or a hog, there'd be blood everywhere, maybe a body, or at least some hair stuck in the grill. But there was nothing except that smear and the damage to my truck. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring into the darkness, my mind racing. What the hell was that thing? It ran on two legs. It was huge, and it didn't leave a trace. I've lived in Florida my whole life. I know the animals around here. Bears don't run like that. They're slower, more lumbering. And hogs? No way. Hogs are low to the ground and wouldn't take a hit like that without leaving a mess. This was something else. I started thinking about all those stories I'd heard growing up, about the skunk ape or Bigfoot in the swamps. I always brushed them off as nonsense, but right then it didn't seem so crazy. The fear started to sink in deeper. What if it was still out there, hurt and angry? What if it came back? I felt exposed, standing there in the open with just a flashlight. My skin was crawling and I had this urge to get the hell out of there. So I hurried back to the truck, my boots squelching in the mud. I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sat for a minute, trying to calm down. The smell was still lingering in the cab, like it had seeped in through the vents. I rolled down the window to get some fresh air, but the stink outside was just as bad. I drove away slowly, keeping my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. But the road behind me was empty, just darkness swallowing everything. The rest of the drive home was a blur. Every shadow looked like it was moving, and every noise from the truck made me flinch. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the cab for a long time, just staring at the cracked bumper. I couldn't believe what had happened. I kept going over it in my head. The sight of that thing running, the impact, the lack of evidence, it didn't add up. The next day I checked the truck again in the daylight. The damage was real. The bumper was definitely cracked, and the grille was bent. That oily smear was still there, dark and greasy, and it hadn't washed away in the night dew. I thought about reporting it to the police or the wildlife people, But what would I say? Hey, I hit a Bigfoot last night, but there's no proof. They'd laugh me out of the room. Plus, I didn't want anyone poking around out there. If that thing was real, I didn't want to attract attention to it. The swamp hides things, and some stuff is better left alone. I've driven down County Road 341 a few times since then, but I always go slow now, and I avoid it at night if I can. Every time I cross that bridge, my heart starts racing, and I can almost smell that foul odor again. I'm convinced I hit a Sasquatch, nothing else fits, and I know how lucky I am that it didn't fight back. If something that big and strong wanted to, it could have torn my truck apart, but it didn't. It just disappeared into the swamp, like it was never there. To this day, I can't explain it. I don't have any answers, just this gut-deep fear that I stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I hear noises outside and wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting, but I'll never know for sure. All I have is the memory, the damage to my truck, and this heavy feeling that I'm better off forgetting, even though I know I never will. Story 7. All right, I'll just get right into it. I've been sitting on this for a while, not sure if I should even type it out, but I guess if I don't tell someone, it's just gonna eat at me forever. So here goes. It was late summer, maybe 3 years ago now. I was living in this old farmhouse on the edge of a big property out in Washington, way outside of town. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a half-mile down the road, and the only light at night comes from the moon. I liked the quiet. Still do mostly. But after what I saw, the quiet feels different. It feels like it's watching me. That particular day, it had been hot. The kind of hot that makes the air shimmer over the fields. But as evening came on, the heat started to break. The air was getting cooler. The kind of cool that makes you glad you wore a long-sleeve shirt, even if you rolled the sleeves up all day. The sun was starting to dip down, painting the sky in these oranges and purples. But it wasn't dark yet. It was that time of day where everything looks sharp and clear for a little while before the shadows get long. I was out near the edge of the big field, the one that butts right up against the woods. I had my binoculars with me. I'd gotten into the habit of scanning the deer trails in the evening. It was peaceful. The field was mostly cut hay at that point, so it was just this golden-brown stubble. On the other side of it was a line of cottonwood trees, and behind them a really dense wall of fir trees, dark green, almost black from a distance. I was just sweeping the tree line, not really expecting to see much. Maybe a deer stepping out, or some turkeys. I remember lifting the binoculars to my eyes, the familiar weight of them in my hands, the cold metal of the eyepieces against my skin. I was scanning along where the deer trails came out of the cottonwoods, following a little dip in the land where a creek runs. You could just see a glint of water through the trees, and then I saw it. It wasn't a deer. It was tall, so damn tall, and it was standing straight up on two legs. It came out of the fir trees, not from the cottonwoods where the deer usually come from, but from the deep, dark part of the woods. It just stepped out into the open space between the firs and the cottonwoods. My brain sort of stuttered. It didn't compute. For a second I thought it was a bear. But bears don't stand up like that and just walk. They hunch, they amble. This thing was walking. Purposeful strides. It was covered in hair, fur, whatever you want to call it. It was a dark brown, but where the last of the sunlight hit it, it looked almost reddish. It had these huge shoulders, and its arms were long, swinging slightly as it moved. I could see the muscles working under that dark fur. It was real, solid. My heart, which had been just ticking along, suddenly slammed into my ribs. I froze. I didn't even breathe. I just kept the binoculars glued to my eyes, my hands getting slick with sweat. And then, before I could even process that first one, another one stepped out. This one was smaller, a lot smaller, lighter built, and its hair wasn't dark brown. It was a reddish brown like cinnamon. It moved quickly, almost skittishly, right behind the big one, and then another small one, same reddish-brown hair, came out right after it. My mind was screaming, "What the hell am I looking at?" It was like a switch flipped in my head. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't anything I knew. Then the fourth one came out, another big one, massive, even bigger than the first. It came out last, and it paused for a second, turning its head back the way they came. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a dark, hairy profile, but I got the overwhelming gut punch feeling that it was checking behind them, making sure the coast was clear. That's when the real terror hit me. It wasn't just one creature. It was a group, a family. The big one in front, the two smaller ones in the middle, and the other big one bringing up the rear. Just like a family of anything. A family of deer, a family of people, a parent, a couple of kids, and another parent guarding the back. They never broke their stride. They moved together, tight, like a unit. They walked on two legs the whole time, with a smooth, powerful gait that ate up the ground. They didn't look clumsy. They looked efficient. They dipped down into the little creek bed, and for a second, they were out of sight behind the bank. My lungs were burning, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I gasped in a ragged mouthful of air, my hands shaking so bad the binoculars were jittering all over the place. I had to press my elbows into my ribs to steady them. They came up the other side of the creek, onto the open farmland. They were in the clear now, maybe a couple 100 yards from me. The golden light of the setting sun was directly on them. I could see everything. The way the fur on their backs and legs was matted in places, the sheer bulk of the adults, the way the smaller ones stayed close to the lead one. They were crossing the field, heading for another patch of trees on the far side. They were fast, so much faster than something that big should be able to move. It was just a steady, ground-eating walk, but they covered distance like they were in a hurry without actually running. The silence was the worst part. They made no sound, no grunts, no snaps of twigs, nothing. Just this silent, purposeful movement across an open field. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body, under my arms, down my back. My scalp was prickling. This wasn't wonder. This was pure, undiluted fear, the kind that sits in your stomach like a block of ice. I was seeing something I was never supposed to see, something that wasn't meant to be seen. And I was completely alone. The lead one, the first big one, reached the tree line on the far side and just melted into the shadows. It didn't pause. It just stepped into the darkness and was gone. The two smaller ones followed right behind, one after the other, disappearing into the trees. The last big one, the one at the back, stopped at the edge of the trees. It turned its head, and I swear to God it looked right across the field, right at me. It was too far to see its eyes, but I felt it. I felt its attention lock onto me. It knew I was there. It had known the whole time. That moment lasted forever. My blood went cold. I was paralyzed. I couldn't have moved if the house was on fire. I just stared back, through the shaking lenses, into whatever was looking at me from across that field. Then it just turned and followed the others into the woods. It was gone. The whole thing, from the moment the first one stepped out to when the last one disappeared, couldn't have been more than 2 minutes, probably less. It felt like a lifetime. I slowly lowered the binoculars. My arms were trembling. The field was empty again, just golden stubble and long shadows. It was so quiet. The normal evening sounds, the crickets, a distant bird, seemed to have stopped. Or maybe I just couldn't hear them over the pounding in my ears. I stood there for, I don't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20, just staring at the spot where they'd vanished. My mind was a mess. I kept trying to find another explanation, a trick of the light, people in fursuits. No, it was impossible. The size, the movement, the way they were built. It was all wrong for a person. The sheer muscle, the way they moved with such natural, powerful grace. It was real. I had just seen a family of something that shouldn't exist. The awe came later. mixed in with the fear, the sheer, staggering fact of what I'd witnessed. It was rare. It was undeniable. I had proof, right there in my own head, but it was proof I couldn't share. Because who would believe me? I finally made myself move. I walked back to the house, and every sound in the woods around me made me jump. Every rustle in the grass was one of them coming back. I locked the door behind me, which felt stupid and pointless, but I did it anyway. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, just trying to process it. I kept thinking about how they moved together, how the big one in the back was watching out for them. That wasn't just a bunch of animals, that was a group, a family. There was intelligence there, there was cohesion, they had a purpose, they were going somewhere. I've never gone back out to that field edge at dusk with my binoculars. I still live here, but I'm cautious now. I watch the tree line from the kitchen window. I listen to the sounds of the night differently. I think about them often, what they are, where they were going, if they're still out there. And sometimes when the wind is right and the woods are quiet, I get this feeling, this cold, crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like I'm the one being watched. Like maybe they remember the guy in the field with the binoculars too. I saw them, clear as day, and I've never been able to explain it. Not really. Not to anyone, and not even to myself. I just saw them, and now I know, and that's it. That's all there is. Story 8. Okay, I'll try to write this. I don't talk about this stuff much, not even with my brother anymore. We just don't. But I've been reading this forum for a while, and I guess I feel like if anyone might get it, it's you guys. So here it is. Just typing this out makes my hands feel a little clammy. It wasn't just one thing, it was a few times, spread out over years, and each time it was like they decided to let me see them, not me deciding to go look. You know, it was always on their terms. That's the part that sticks with me, that feeling of being allowed a glimpse, and it was never a friendly feeling. It was a cold, deep-down dread. The first time, I was 12. My brother was 10. We were walking home on this gravel road just outside of town in Alberta. It was the kind of road where the gravel is all white and dusty, and it kicks up little clouds around your sneakers. The ditches were full of long grass and those spiky weeds that stick to your socks. It was a normal afternoon. The sun was starting to go down, but it wasn't dark yet. Just that long golden light that makes everything look soft. We were arguing about something stupid, probably whose turn it was to take out the trash, and we were kicking stones as we walked. Then we both just stopped talking at the same time. It wasn't a sound that made us stop. It was the silence that dropped, like all the birds and bugs just shut off. I looked up and I saw it crossing the road maybe 50, 60 yards ahead of us. It was tall. So damn tall. Its head was level with the lower branches of the poplar trees lining the road. It was covered in this fur, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was kind of a shaggy dark brown, almost black in the shadows. It was walking on 2 feet, and its arms were so long. They swung, like really swung, with each step, its hands almost brushing its knees. But the thing that froze me solid was that it was completely silent. Gravel road, right? We were making crunching sounds with every step. This thing, it must have weighed, I don't even know, a lot. But it crossed that road without a single sound, no crunch, no snap of a twig from the ditch, nothing. It just moved, this big, dark, furry shape, and it didn't even look at us. It walked straight across and into the bush on the other side like we weren't even there. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, and then the trees and shadows just swallowed it up. My brother and I stood there. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a fast, panicky thumping. I looked at him and his face was white. His mouth was hanging open a little. We didn't say a word. We didn't run. We just stood there for what felt like a full minute, just staring at the empty spot where it had been. Then, without any discussion, we both started walking again, faster this time. We didn't run, but we power walked the whole rest of the way home, our shoulders hunched, not looking at each other, not looking back. We never talked about it. Not that night, not ever. It was like an unspoken rule. If we didn't say it out loud, it couldn't be real. But we both knew, we both saw it. The second time was years later. I was 19, visiting my cousin out in Alberta again, a different area, more farmland mixed with woods. It was getting on towards dusk. I'd gone for a walk by myself on this old trail that ran along the edge of a creek. I liked the quiet. The light was fading, turning everything blue and grey. I was just walking, thinking about nothing much, when I heard a branch snap. Not a little twig. This was a proper branch, thick. It cracked loud enough to echo a little in the quiet. It came from off to my left, in a thicker part of the woods. I stopped dead. My first thought was a moose. You don't want to surprise a moose. So I stood still, trying to peer into the trees. It was hard to see, all shadows and trunks. Then I saw it, part of it. It was behind a big pine tree, but the tree wasn't wide enough to hide it all. I saw a shoulder, a massive, dark, bulky shoulder, and part of a head. It was just standing there, and I felt it looking at me. I can't explain that feeling any better than that. You know when someone is staring at you from across a room? It's a pressure. This was like that, but 100 times heavier. It was a physical weight, this feeling of being watched, studied. It was tall, way taller than a man. I'd guess 9 feet. It was just this dark shape, but I could see it was covered in the same kind of shaggy fur, and I could feel its eyes on me. I didn't see its eyes, but I felt them. It was so still. I wasn't. My heart was going crazy again, that same frantic rhythm from when I was a kid. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move for a second, just locked in place by that feeling of being watched. Then my survival instinct kicked in. I didn't run, not at first. I just slowly, carefully started backing up, one step then another, never taking my eyes off that dark shape behind the tree. I could feel the rough bark of a tree behind me with my hand, and I used it to guide myself, to make sure I didn't trip. After I'd put about 20 feet between me and it, I turned around and I walked fast, back the way I came. I didn't look back. I could still feel that gaze on my back, like a cold spot between my shoulder blades. When I got back to my cousin's house, I was breathing hard, trying to act normal. I didn't say anything. But later that night, my cousin mentioned just offhand that their dogs had been acting weird all day, whining, pacing, not wanting to go outside. They had 2 big shepherds and they were acting like scared puppies. I just nodded and didn't say a word. I knew why. The last time, the one that really sealed it for me, was in the winter of 1997. I was in my 20s, up near Blue River in British Columbia. Me and a couple of friends were out snowmobiling. It was a perfect day for it. Cold, clear sky, a few feet of fresh powder on the ground. We were way out, in this huge clearing surrounded by dense forest. We'd stopped to have a hot drink from a thermos, just sitting on our machines, the engines rumbling, laughing about something. That's when one of my friends, Mike, just pointed and said, "What the hell is that?" We all looked across the clearing. Maybe a couple 100 yards away, right at the tree line, there was a dark figure moving between the trees. It wasn't a bear. Bears hibernate. It was too tall and too dark to be a moose, and it was walking upright. It was just this big black shape, stark against the white snow, moving with a purpose. It would step out from behind one tree, then move quickly to another, almost like it was using them for cover. "Shut the engines off," I said. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. Mike and my other friend Greg killed their engines. The sudden silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just the faint ringing in your ears after the engine noise stops, and the sound of your own heartbeat. And the snow. You could hear the snow falling. That tiny, almost silent hiss as the flakes landed. We just sat there, frozen on our snowmobiles, watching this thing. It was moving parallel to the tree line, and then it stopped. It stood there, half hidden by a massive cedar, and it just looked at us. I couldn't see its face from that distance, just a dark shape, but I knew it was looking. That same feeling of being watched, of being sized up, washed over me again, so strong it made me feel sick to my stomach. It was the same feeling from the trail when I was 19, the exact same. It stood there for maybe 10 seconds, which felt like an hour, then it turned and just walked straight into the thicker part of the forest. It didn't run, it just took these long, deliberate strides and was gone, swallowed by the deep green and black of the woods. We didn't say anything. Mike started his snowmobile, then Greg, then me. We just turned around and headed back to the cabin. We rode in silence the whole way. It wasn't until hours later, when we were sitting around the wood stove, the warmth finally seeping back into our bones, that Mike brought it up. "What was that thing?" he asked, staring into the fire. Greg just shook his head. "Don't know. Didn't look like anything I've ever seen." I just nodded. I didn't tell them about my other times. I didn't need to. We all saw it. We all felt it. That feeling of something ancient and wild that didn't belong to our world. Something that looked back at you and knew you were there and didn't care. That's the thing that stays with me, even now. It wasn't just seeing something weird. It was the silence. The first one made no sound on the gravel. The last one, we only heard the snow and the feeling of being watched. That intense, focused attention from something so much bigger and stronger than you. Something that could have easily closed the distance if it wanted to. But it never did. It just looked, and then it left. Like I was being given a message or a warning. A reminder that the woods, the real deep woods, aren't ours. They never were. There are things in there that walk on two legs, that are smart enough to hide, and that choose sometimes to let you see them. And you never, ever forget what that feels like. You just don't. Story 9. It was one of those sticky July evenings where the air feels thick enough to chew, the kind that makes your shirt cling to your back the second you step outside. The year was 1975. My fiancée and I were in my beat-up Chevy Nova, heading east on Route 36 through Ohio. We were coming back from visiting her aunt, a trip we made every couple of months. The car had no air conditioning, so both windows were cranked all the way down, and the wind roaring through the cabin was a hot, noisy relief. I remember my arm was resting on the door, my elbow getting sunburned from the low evening sun. She was in the passenger seat, her bare feet up on the dashboard, tracing patterns in the thin layer of road dust. We were talking about nothing important, about maybe stopping for a root beer float if we saw a stand, about the weird wallpaper in her aunt's bathroom. Just normal, easy stuff. The kind of conversation you have when you've been driving for an hour and the road is straight and empty ahead of you. It was around 6:30. The light was that long, golden kind that makes everything look soft and beautiful, but also throws deep, long shadows from the trees lining the road. We were doing 55, right at the speed limit, just cruising. I had one hand on the wheel, the radio was playing some AM staticky station, and I was just content. It was a perfect, simple summer evening. Then it happened. It came from the north side of the road, from the tree line. My brain didn't even register it as a shape at first. It was just a blur of violent, impossible motion, a shadow that detached itself from the other shadows and launched across the asphalt. I've seen deer my whole life. I've seen them bolt. I've seen them freeze in the headlights. This was nothing like a deer. It was on two legs, two long, powerful legs. It was tall and built solid like a linebacker, but it moved with a speed that was just, it wasn't right, it wasn't natural. It sprinted from our left to our right, from north to south, right in front of the car. The distance it covered, I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, had to be about 30 yards, the width of the road and the shoulder on both sides. It crossed that in what felt like 3 steps. 3. I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't a run, it was a series of immense ground-eating strides. Each footfall seemed to propel it an impossible distance. Its legs were a blur. My foot slammed on the brake instinctively, but there was no time to even slow down. We were just on it, and then it was past us. In that split second, as it passed through the patch of sunlight between the tree shadows, right in front of our car, I got a look at it. It was black. Not like skin black, but a solid matte black, like a silhouette cut out of the world. It had no features I could make out, no face, no clothes, no details. Just a human-like shape, but bulkier through the shoulders and chest, with arms that pumped as it ran. It was lean in the waist, and its legs, God, its legs were so long. The speed was the most terrifying part. It was the speed of an Olympic sprinter, but with a raw, powerful gait that looked like it could smash through a wall. And right then I saw the other car, a station wagon coming west towards us. Its headlights weren't on yet, but I saw it clearly. And I saw this thing cross directly in its path too. It must have missed the station wagon's front bumper by inches. The thing never broke stride, never hesitated. It just flew. Then it was gone, vanished into the thick brush and trees on the south side of the road. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds, the time it takes to draw a sharp breath. The car filled with this dead silence. The radio was still playing some tinny pop song, but it felt like it was coming from 1,000,000 miles away. I could hear the tires on the pavement, the wind rushing past the windows. I looked over at my fiancée. Her feet were off the dash. She was frozen, her hands gripping the edges of her seat, her knuckles white. Her mouth was slightly open. I managed to say, "Did you see that?" My voice came out as a croak. It didn't even sound like me. She just nodded, a quick, jerky movement. She couldn't speak. Her eyes were huge, fixed on the spot where it had disappeared. I checked the rear-view mirror. Nothing. Just empty road and the station wagon, now receding into the distance. It hadn't slowed down either. Did they see it? Were they just as stunned as we were? My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping. I could feel the adrenaline making my hands shake on the wheel. I took my foot off the brake and we kept driving, but I dropped my speed to 40, then 35. I was scanning the tree line on the south side, my eyes straining, looking for any movement, any sign. "What was that?" she finally whispered. Her voice was thin and shaky. "I don't know." That's all I could say. I didn't know. My mind was racing, trying to fit what I'd seen into a box I understood. A man in a dark suit. No, the speed was all wrong. The proportions were wrong. A bear. Bears don't run on 2 legs like that, not with that kind of fluid, explosive speed. It was bipedal, completely upright. We started talking then, our words tumbling over each other. "It was on 2 legs, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "It was so fast. It crossed the whole road in 3 steps, I said, needing to hear the insanity of it out loud. 3 steps, that's not possible. We went over every detail, the black color, the way its arms moved, the sheer terrifying power in its gait. It didn't lope or amble, it sprinted. It was a creature built for one thing, covering ground with brutal, terrifying efficiency. And then, because we were kids of the 70s and we'd watched all those weird shows and read all those paperbacks, the word came up. It hung in the air between us. "Bigfoot," she said, almost hesitantly, like she was afraid saying it would make us sound crazy. But we weren't crazy. We'd both seen it. 2 sets of eyes, from the same angle, at the same time. There was no denying the reality of what had just happened 10 feet in front of our car. "It moved just like they say on the radio shows," I muttered, thinking of the programs where people described these things not as slow, shambling apes, but as incredibly fast, powerful animals. That speed, that's what they talk about. That's how they disappear. The rest of the drive was tense. We didn't talk about root beer floats anymore. We talked about what we saw, replaying it, confirming every detail with each other. It was like we were building a shared shield against the sheer weirdness of it. If we both agreed on what happened, then it must be real. And if it was real, then what? The world was suddenly a much bigger and much scarier place. We were too scared to stop. The thought of pulling over, of getting out of the car and walking towards those trees where it vanished. No, absolutely not. Every shadow between the trunks looked like it was moving. Every rustle of leaves in the wind from our open windows sounded like a footstep. My skin was crawling. I felt exposed in the car, like the thing could just reach out from the woods and pluck us off the road. We drove the last 20 miles home in a state of hyper-awareness. I've never been so focused on a stretch of road in my life. Every mailbox, every driveway, every break in the trees felt like a potential ambush point. I kept expecting to see it again, standing at the tree line, watching us pass. We got home just as full dark was setting in. We didn't even unpack the car. We just went inside, locked the door and turned on every light in the house. We sat at the kitchen table, not saying much, just drinking glasses of water with trembling hands. The image was burned onto the back of my eyelids, that black shape stretched out in a full sprint, eating up the road with those impossible strides. The next day, in the clear, bright light of a Sunday morning, a different kind of curiosity took over. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was mixed with a need to understand. I told her I had to go back. I had to see the spot. She didn't want to go. She said she never wanted to see that part of Route 36 ever again. I understood, but I couldn't let it go. So I went alone. I drove back slowly, retracing our route from the night before. It was harder to find the exact spot than I thought it would be. Everything looks different in the daytime, but I found it. I recognized a particular bend in the road, a specific cluster of oak trees on the north side. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, right about where I thought we were when it happened. My heart was thumping again, a dull, anxious rhythm. I got out of the car. The air was warm and still, filled with the sound of crickets and birds. It was just a normal country road. I walked across the asphalt to the south side, to where it had vanished, and that's when I saw it. There was a ditch. I hadn't seen it the night before. It was hidden by the tall grass and the shadows, but it was there. And it wasn't some little gutter. This thing was a gully, a real trench. I stood at the edge and looked down. It had to be at least 5, maybe 6 feet deep. And it was wide, maybe 8 feet across, filled with brambles and weeds. My blood ran cold. The thing had sprinted across the road, hit the edge of this ditch, and without even breaking its stride, it had leaped. It had cleared this entire gully in one go, landing on the other side and disappearing into the woods. That's why it ran with such explosive, terrifying speed. It wasn't just crossing the road. It was building up momentum to jump a 6-foot-deep trench like it was a puddle. A human couldn't do that. A deer wouldn't do that on 2 legs. A bear would have just gone down into the ditch and climbed out the other side. This thing had seen the obstacle, and its solution was to generate so much power that it could simply ignore it. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that ditch. The reality of what we had witnessed settled on me with a physical weight. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a shared hallucination. Something real, something unbelievably strong and fast had crossed our path. Something that could move in ways that nothing else I knew of could move. I never saw it again. I never found any tracks. The ground was too hard and dry. I never heard any strange calls from the woods. It was just that one fleeting, world-shattering glimpse, but it changed everything. I look at woods differently now. I look at the shadows between the trees. I think about how much empty, wild land there still is out there, even in Ohio, and I know, with a certainty that still chills me to the bone 40-some years later, that we are not alone in these woods. Something else is out there, and it can move faster than anything you can imagine. I still see it sometimes in my dreams. That black, fluid shape, a blot of pure motion against the golden evening road, its legs driving it forward with a power that defies physics, clearing a 6-foot ditch as if it were nothing. I see it, and for a second I'm back in that hot car, my heart in my throat, watching the impossible happen right in front of me. and I still don't have a single explanation that makes any sense. It was just there, and then it was gone. Story 10. I'm a retired postal worker. Been retired for about 5 years now. My wife passed away a couple years back, so it's just me and this old house on a couple acres at the edge of the woods. I've got a nice routine. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons puttering in the shed, evenings in my sunroom. That sunroom, it was my favorite spot in the whole house. 3 walls of screens, lets in the breeze. And you can see the whole backyard and the tree line. I'd sit out there for hours, just listening to the crickets and the wind. Felt peaceful, safe. This was last spring, a Tuesday night, I think. It was one of those first truly warm nights after a long winter. The air was sweet, not too humid yet. I'd fallen asleep in my favorite armchair out there, the one with the faded floral pattern my wife picked out. I must have been snoring. I've got this real loud, raspy snore. My kids used to joke they could hear it from the other end of the house. It's a family trait, I guess. I don't know what woke me up. It wasn't a loud sound. It was more like the absence of sound. The crickets had stopped. Everything had gone completely silent. That was the first thing that registered in my half-asleep brain. The silence. It was a heavy, thick kind of quiet, the kind that feels wrong. Then I heard a soft, wet sniffing sound. Right outside the screen, my eyes just snapped open. I didn't move my head, just my eyes. And there it was. It was right there, right there. Its face was maybe 2 feet from mine, separated only by the thin mesh of the screen. My heart just seized in my chest. I swear it stopped for a second, then kicked back into a frantic pounding rhythm that was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't process what I was seeing at first. My brain was screaming bear or weird dog, but it wasn't. It was a face, a huge, leathery face, dark like old saddle leather, and it was framed by this matted dark brown hair that was streaked with grey like an old man's. The hair was long and hung down, tangled with bits of leaves and twigs. The face itself was pushed in like a gorilla's, but flatter, wider, and the eyes, God, the eyes. They were deep set, sunk back under this heavy brow ridge, and they were a dark, intelligent brown. They weren't animal eyes. They were focused. They were looking right at me, studying me. It was just staring. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was curious. Its nostrils were flared, and I could see the damp, dark leather of its nose twitch with each quiet, sniffing breath. I could smell it too, a musky, wet dog smell, but mixed with something else, something earthy and rotten like old leaves and damp soil. It was a thick, heavy smell that made the air feel dirty. I was frozen. My whole body was locked up. I was still half slumped in the chair, my neck at an awkward angle, but I couldn't move a muscle. I just stared back into those deep-set eyes. I could see the individual pores on its leathery skin, the way the hair grew in coarse, wiry clumps around its jaw. It wasn't making a sound, just that soft, rhythmic sniffing in and out. I remember thinking stupidly that it must have heard my snoring. That's what drew it in. It was investigating this weird, raspy noise coming from my house. Then its lips pulled back just a little. Not a snarl, not a threat. It was more like a thoughtful expression. I could see its teeth, big and blocky and yellowish. That's when the fear truly broke through the paralysis. It wasn't the terror of a predator about to pounce. It was the deeper, colder horror of realizing that this thing, this creature that wasn't supposed to exist, was real, and it was intelligent, and it was right here, looking at me like I was a fascinating bug under a glass. My body unfroze all at once. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. I didn't think, I just moved. I launched myself out of the chair so fast I almost fell. My legs were like rubber, but I scrambled for the sliding glass door that led back into the main house. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought I was having a heart attack. I fumbled for the handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I didn't dare look back. I just yanked the door open, stumbled through and slammed it shut, my whole body weight throwing the lock into place with a loud, solid thunk. I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the cool glass of the door, my chest heaving. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake. I forced myself to look back out into the sunroom. The chair was empty. Through the screens, I could see the dark shape of it moving away from the sunroom. It was walking on two legs, with a slow, heavy, rolling gait. It was massive. I'd only seen its head and shoulders before, but its body was huge, covered in the same shaggy, dark hair. It must have been 7, maybe 8 feet tall. The sheer size of it made my knees weak. It walked across my backyard, moving with a purpose. It wasn't running. It was just ambling. The motion-sensitive lights on the back of my house flicked on, flooding the yard with a harsh white light. It stopped. It turned its head slowly and looked right at the light. It didn't flinch or squint. It just looked at it, like it was processing what it was. Then it turned away and continued towards my tool shed. My shed is an old wooden thing painted red. I keep my lawnmower, some tools, a bunch of junk in there. It stopped at the shed door. It reached out a hand. It was huge with long, thick fingers and just laid its palm flat against the wood. It stood there for a long moment, its head cocked, just feeling the texture of the wood. It ran its fingers over the hinges, then down to the padlock I have on it. It didn't try to break it. It just touched the cold metal of the lock, then tapped it lightly with a fingernail that was thick and dark, like chipped stone. It was examining my shed, the way I might look at an interesting rock I found in the woods. It was so casual, so curious. That was almost scarier than if it had been tearing the place apart. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was a creature that was thinking, that was exploring its environment. And my home was just a part of that environment. It stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a minute or two. The motion lights stayed on, illuminating it in that stark, unforgiving light. I could see the way its muscles moved under that thick coat of hair. I could see the power in its shoulders. I could see the grey streaks in its hair more clearly now, around its face and on its broad back. It looked old, weathered. Then, it dropped its hand from the shed. It turned its head and looked right back at the house, right at the window where I was standing. It couldn't possibly see me. The interior of the house was dark, and the glass was reflecting the yard lights. But I felt seen. I felt like it knew I was there, watching. Its gaze swept over the house, and then, without any hurry, it turned and walked towards the tree line at the edge of my property. It didn't look back. It just stepped into the shadows between the first few pines, and the darkness just swallowed it whole. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible shape in my backyard, and the next, it was gone. The motion lights clicked off a moment later, plunging the yard back into darkness. I stayed pressed against that glass door for a long time. My breathing slowly evened out, but the tremors in my hands didn't stop. The smell of it, that musky, earthy smell, seemed to have followed me inside, or maybe it was just stuck in my nose. I stood there until my legs ached and the sky started to lighten from black to deep blue in the east. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat in my kitchen, in the dark, staring out the window at the spot where it had disappeared. It's never come back. I've looked for signs, footprints, broken branches, anything. But we had a light rain later that morning and it washed everything away. There was no trace. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing, but I know I didn't. I can still see that leathery face, those deep-set eyes staring right into mine. I can still smell it. I don't sit in the sunroom at night anymore. I had a deadbolt installed on the interior door to it. I keep all the outside lights on from dusk till dawn. I'm grateful, I guess, that it was just curious, that it didn't try to get in, but that curiosity, that's what sticks with me. It wasn't a monster from a movie. It was just a thing living in the woods. And it heard a strange noise and came to see what it was. And I was the strange noise. The woods don't feel peaceful anymore. They feel like they're watching. And on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, I sometimes catch a whiff of that wet dog, rotten leaf smell on the breeze, and my heart starts to pound all over again. I'll never feel truly safe here again. I know that for a fact. It came so close. It was right there. And then it was just gone. Story 11. It was just an ordinary Tuesday evening, maybe around 6 o'clock. The kind of evening that usually just blurs into the next one out here. I was at the kitchen sink, my hands in warm, soapy water, scrubbing a baking dish from dinner. My husband was in the living room watching the news, and I could hear the low mumble of the TV. Our two boys were supposed to be doing their homework. My youngest, he's 10, was probably doodling in his notebook. My older one, he's 15, was fidgety, pacing near the back door. The window above the sink looks right out into the backyard. Our property backs up against what feels like 1,000,000 acres of Washington state forest. It's dense, dark, even in the middle of the day. We've got a little paddock out there for our pony, Biscuit. She's a sweet old thing, usually dozing or quietly munching on grass. But she wasn't quiet that night. I first noticed it as a sort of tension in my shoulders, a background noise that was wrong. She was making this low, worried, whickering sound, not her normal, contented snorts. Then she started pacing the fence line, her head jerking up, ears swiveling toward the tree line. She'd stop, stamp a hoof, and let out a sharp, nervous snort. It wasn't the usual annoyance at a stray dog or a raccoon. This was different. This was pure fear. I called out to my husband, "Hey, something's spooking Biscuit." He grumbled something from the couch about it probably being those Johnson kids from down the road cutting through the property again. They'd done it before, thought it was funny to tease her. My 15-year-old overheard and immediately perked up. He's at that age where he's itching for a little drama, a reason to feel like he's defending the homestead. "I'll go check it out," he said. And before I could tell him to just let his dad handle it, he'd grabbed his BB gun from the corner by the door. It's not a real gun, just a pellet rifle he uses for target practice. But it made him feel tough. "Just yell if you see anything," I told him, drying my hands on a dish towel, "and don't you dare shoot at anyone." He gave me a cocky grin and slipped out the back door. I kept watching from the window. The outside sensor light had flicked on, casting a harsh yellow pool on the gravel path that leads from the back porch down to the paddock and then vanishes into the woods. My son walked confidently down that path, the BB gun held loosely at his side. He was maybe 30 feet from the house when he just stopped. It wasn't a normal stop. It was like he'd run into an invisible wall. His whole body went rigid. The cocky slouch vanished. The BB gun, which had been so casually held, was now gripped in both hands, white-knuckled, held across his body like a shield. He was staring straight ahead, into the darkness just beyond the reach of the sensor light. My heart did a little stutter step. "What is it?" I whispered to the window. He didn't call out. He didn't turn around. He just started backing up, slow, deliberate, shuffling steps. He wasn't taking his eyes off whatever was in front of him. It was the most careful, terrified retreat I have ever seen. He backed all the way up the path, up the porch steps, and then fumbled blindly for the door handle, his head still craned toward the yard. That's when I moved. The dish towel dropped from my hand. I didn't think. I just went to the door and yanked it open. He practically fell inside, his face pale, his eyes wide and glassy. "What?" I demanded, my voice sharp with a fear I didn't yet understand. "What did you see?" He was breathing in short, ragged gasps. "Mom, there's something out there." "What kind of something? An animal? A person?" He just shook his head, unable to form the words. He later told me, his voice still shaky, that it was a massive, dark-furred figure, just standing there on the path, watching him. He said it was taller than Dad and broader, and the way it stood was just wrong. That's when we both heard it. A heavy, solid crunch of gravel from the direction of the path. Something was moving out there. I don't know what came over me. Mama bear instinct, I guess. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind me. The sensor light was still on, but it only reached so far. Beyond its glow, the world was a pit of blackness. But there was a smaller path that cuts down to the creek, and a motion-activated solar light we have on a fence post down there flickered on, and that's when I saw it. It was crossing the creek. The creek is shallow, maybe 15 feet wide, with a few big rocks in it. This thing, it just stepped from one bank to the other in what seemed like one fluid, powerful motion. It didn't splash, it didn't stumble. It moved with a heavy, grounded grace that was utterly alien. It stopped under a big Douglas fir tree on the far side of the creek. The solar light wasn't bright, but it was enough. The last rays of the sun were gone, but this little light caught it just right, illuminating details I will never, ever be able to forget. It was huge. My son was right. It had to be at least 6.5 feet tall. Its shoulders were impossibly broad like a powerlifter's, tapering down to a narrower waist. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's. It was long, shaggy, a mix of black and dark grey, and I swear in that faint light I saw patches on its back and shoulders that looked almost golden, like old straw. The fur was matted in places, wet from the creek. Its body was one thing, its posture was another. It wasn't on all fours. It was standing on 2 legs, fully upright, just like a person, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. Its head was set forward on its shoulders, not balanced on top like ours. And its face, I couldn't see its eyes clearly. They were just dark shadows under a heavy brow ridge. But its face, it wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't a monkey's face. It was like a crude, powerful version of a human face, a flat nose, a strong jaw. There was an intelligence there, a presence. It wasn't just some dumb animal. It was looking right at us. It was looking right at me. A cold dread, the kind that feels like ice water in your veins, washed over me. This wasn't a curiosity. This was a threat. It was in our yard. It had been between my son and the house. My fear suddenly boiled over into a raw, protective rage. I took a half step forward onto the top step of the porch and I yelled. I don't even remember the words. It was something stupid like, "Get out of here, go on, get!" The moment the sound left my mouth, the thing reacted. Its head tilted back just a fraction. Its chest seemed to swell, and then it opened its mouth and it screamed. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a howl, it was a scream, a high, piercing, deafeningly loud shriek that seemed to tear right through the evening quiet and vibrate in my teeth. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world. It felt ancient and wild and so angry. The sound hit me in the chest like a physical blow. I actually stumbled back a step. Before the echo had even died, it moved. It took one massive, deliberate step toward us. Not a run, not a charge, a step that said, "I am coming closer." And as it stepped, it raised one of those long, powerful arms. It didn't make a fist. It just raised its arm, palm out, in a gesture that was unmistakably, terrifyingly human. It was a warning, a clear, aggressive stop or stay back. That was it. That was the breaking point. The scream had frozen me. The gesture shattered the freeze. I screamed myself, a short, sharp cry of pure panic. I spun around, shoved my son back through the door, and fell inside after him, scrambling on the linoleum floor. My husband was on his feet now, the news forgotten, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. I couldn't form a sentence. I just pointed a trembling hand toward the back door and yelled, "The roof! We have to get on the roof!" It was the only place I could think of that felt safe. That was up high. The garage has a low, sloped roof you can access from my younger son's bedroom window. We all scrambled into his room. He was sitting on his bed, his homework forgotten, his eyes huge. He'd heard the scream. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice small. "No time, just move," my husband barked, heaving the window open. He climbed out first, then helped pull our 10-year-old out. I pushed my older son out next and then clambered out myself, my knees scraping against the rough shingles. We huddled together on that cold, gritty roof, all four of us. We were all breathing like we'd just run a mile. Below us, the backyard was silent again, eerily silent. The sensor light was still on. The solar light by the creek was still on, but the thing was gone. We stayed there for what felt like an hour, just staring into the darkness, our hearts hammering against our ribs. The only sound was our ragged breathing and the faint rustle of the wind in the trees. My younger son, huddled against my side, whispered, "Was that a big monkey?" I just held him tighter. I had no answer. After a long while, when the shaking in my hands had subsided to a fine tremor, we saw a movement at the far edge of the tree line, way past the creek. A massive, dark shape detached itself from the shadows and moved with that same unsettling, powerful gait into the deeper woods. It never looked back. It just vanished. We stayed on that roof until we saw the flashing blue and red lights of a sheriff's deputy's car coming up our long driveway. We must have called them at some point. It's all a blur. Climbing back inside, my legs were so weak I could barely stand. The deputy was a nice guy, skeptical but polite. He took our statements. He went out with a big flashlight. He came back and said he hadn't seen anything, but that our two dogs, who usually bark at everything, were hiding under my husband's workbench in the garage, trembling, and refused to come out. They stayed there for hours. A few days later, some guys from a Bigfoot research group heard about the police report and came out. They were quiet, serious men. They didn't laugh. They spent a long time down by the creek. They found a single, clear footprint in the soft mud of the far bank. They made a cast of it. They also found a couple of young alder bushes nearby that had been stripped of their branches, not broken, but twisted and pulled off, like something immensely strong had just wrenched them away. We got the report from them weeks later. The cast showed a foot nearly 18 inches long, with dermal ridges like fingerprints on the sole. They said the way the bushes were stripped was consistent with other reported encounters. I don't care about the evidence. I don't care about the reports. What I care about is the memory, the feeling of that scream vibrating in my bones, the sight of that raised arm, that clear, intelligent, threatening gesture. The look on my son's face when he backed into the house, the confidence of boyhood completely stripped away. We still live here. We don't have a choice. But we never go into the woods behind our house anymore. Not even to the tree line. We keep the outside lights on all night, and every time I wash the dishes at that kitchen window, I find myself staring into the darkness, my body tense, waiting. The woods don't feel peaceful anymore. They feel watched. They feel like they're holding their breath. And sometimes on a quiet evening, I'll catch a whiff of something on the air, a smell I can't quite place. Musky, earthy, wild. And my heart will just stop for a second. It's been over a year now. The terror of that one evening, it's just part of us now. It's in the foundation of the house. It's in the silence between the trees. We never saw it again. We never heard that scream again. But we know it's out there, and we know it saw us. Story 12. Okay, I'll just come out and say it. I think I saw one of those things, a Sasquatch. I've never said that out loud to anyone, not even here, but I've been reading stories on this forum for a while now and, well, mine fits. I need to get it off my chest. This happened a few years ago, and I still get a cold feeling in my gut thinking about it. I was staying with my uncle at his old cabin up near Lake Mary in Mammoth Lakes. It was this little A-frame place he'd had for years, tucked back in the trees, real rustic. No TV, spotty cell service, just a wood stove and a lot of quiet. He had these two sheepdogs, brothers, big shaggy things named, well, it doesn't matter what their names were. They were good dogs, usually pretty chill but protective. They went everywhere with him. It was late September, I remember, because the air had that real bite to it at night. The kind that makes your nose hurt when you breathe in. The days were still kind of warm if the sun was out. But the second it went down, winter felt like it was right around the corner. The leaves had mostly turned and a lot were already on the ground, so everything was this blanket of crunchy brown and yellow. That particular day had been normal. We'd gone for a long hike around the lake, made dinner, played some cards. My uncle turned in early, like he always did, around 9. I was a night owl, so I stayed up reading by the light of this crappy old lamp. The only sounds were the crackle of the dying fire in the wood stove and the wind sighing through the pines outside. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. Around 10:30, the dogs started getting restless. They'd been snoozing by the door, but they got up whining a little, scratching at the wood. It was my turn to take them out for their last walk. I wasn't thrilled. It was pitch black out there, I mean proper dark. No streetlights, no neighbors, just a billion stars and a sliver of a moon that didn't do much to light up the ground. The cabin's porch light was just a single dim bulb that pushed back the darkness for maybe 20 feet before the woods just swallowed everything. I pulled on my boots and my heavy coat, grumbling to myself. I clipped the leashes onto the dogs' collars. They were usually excited for a walk, tails wagging, pulling me towards the door. But tonight was different. The second I opened the door, they didn't bolt. They hesitated on the porch, their ears perked up, staring into the blackness. I had to give their leashes a little tug. "Come on, guys, let's get this over with," I whispered. We stepped off the porch and onto the path that led down to the trees. I had a flashlight, one of those big metal mag lights, and I swept the beam ahead of us. The path was just dirt and pine needles flanked by tall, dark trunks. The dogs walked close to my legs, which was unusual for them. They were normally ranging ahead, sniffing everything. Not tonight. They were tense. I could feel it through the leashes, a stiff, nervous energy. We got about 50 yards from the cabin, right to the edge of the tree line where the real forest began. I was planning on just letting them do their business right there so we could hurry back. I was already feeling that primal itch, that little voice that says, "Get back inside." I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just the dark and the silence playing tricks on me. Then the bigger one, the one usually more brave, just stopped dead. He didn't just stop, he planted his feet. A low growl started deep in his chest, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't his normal, "I see a squirrel" growl. This was different. It was a rumbling, guttural warning, a threat. The hair on his back was standing straight up. The other dog immediately mimicked him, letting out a similar growl, lower and more menacing. I froze too. "What is it, boy?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. I strained my ears, listening over the thumping of my own heart. That's when we heard it. From off to our left, deep in the trees, maybe 50 or 100 yards away, came the sound of something big moving through the underbrush. It wasn't a subtle rustle, it was a series of loud, deliberate cracks and snaps. Something was stepping on branches, breaking them, something heavy. A deer can move quietly, a bear can too when it wants to. This wasn't quiet. This was like something just plowing through, not caring about the noise it was making. The dogs went insane. They erupted into a frenzy of barking, the kind of frantic, high-pitched, panicked barking they'd use if a stranger was trying to break down the door. They strained against their leashes, pulling me forward, their bodies rigid with fury and fear. I'm not a small guy, but I had to lean back and dig my heels into the dirt to hold them. They were desperate to get at whatever was out there. The sound of their barking was deafening in the silent night, but underneath it, I could still hear those heavy, crunching footsteps. My blood went cold, pure ice water in my veins. My mouth went dry. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I fumbled with the flashlight, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I swung the beam towards the sound, towards the direction the dogs were losing their minds over. The light cut through the blackness, jumping from tree trunk to tree trunk, casting long, dancing shadows. At first, I didn't see anything, just more trees, more darkness. I kept the beam steady, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. And then I saw it. About 200 feet away, standing behind a couple of thinner pine trees, was a figure. It was massive. I'm not talking tall, I'm talking thick and broad and just huge. It was standing on two legs, perfectly upright. It was covered in hair, dark brown or black. It was hard to tell in the flashlight beam. It looked shaggy, almost ragged, but the worst part, the part that seared itself into my brain, was its face, or where its face should have been. Because when the light hit it, 2 points of light reflected back at me, eyes. They shone back with that bright metallic eyeshine you see from animals like deer or coyotes. But these were higher off the ground, much higher. It was just standing there, completely still. It wasn't moving, it wasn't making a sound, it was just watching us. The dogs were going absolutely berserk, barking, snarling, choking themselves on their collars. But the thing in the trees didn't react. It didn't startle. It didn't run. It just stood there, facing us. And then we locked eyes. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's what happened. My flashlight beam was right on it, and for a split second, I felt like the light was a physical tether between me and it. I was looking directly into those two reflective pinpricks of light, and I knew, with a certainty that hollowed me out, that it was looking right back at me. Time stopped. The frantic barking of the dogs seemed to fade into a dull roar in the background. All I was aware of was the sheer size of this thing, the absolute stillness of it, and the feeling of being seen. Not just seen, but studied. It was an intelligence. I felt it. This wasn't some dumb animal. It was assessing me, the dogs, the situation. The terror I felt in that moment wasn't just a fear of being attacked, though that was part of it. It was a deeper, more profound fear. The fear of being in the presence of something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that defied the world I knew. That locked eye moment felt like it lasted a minute. It was probably only a few seconds, but it felt like a small eternity, suspended in the cold, dark air of those woods. Then, without any warning, it moved. It didn't bolt. It didn't crash away. It simply turned its head, breaking the eye contact, and then its whole body pivoted with a slow, powerful grace that seemed impossible for something that size. It took one step, then another, and it just melted into the trees. It didn't make a sound. Not a single snapped twig, not a rustle of leaves. 1 second it was there, a massive dark silhouette in my flashlight beam, and the next, the forest had swallowed it whole. The crunching footsteps were gone. The presence was just gone. The silence that rushed in was almost as terrifying as the sight of it. The dogs didn't stop barking right away. They kept it up for another 10, 15 seconds, still straining towards the empty trees, but their barks became more confused, less frantic. Then they just stopped, panting heavily, their bodies still trembling. They whined and pressed themselves against my legs, looking up at me like, "What the hell was that?" I didn't need any more convincing. I yanked on the leashes. "Come on," I hissed, and I practically ran back to the cabin. I didn't look back. I could feel the space between my shoulder blades itching, expecting at any second to feel a huge hand clamp down on me, or to hear the sound of it following us. I stumbled up the porch steps, my legs like jelly, fumbled with the door handle, and fell inside, dragging the dogs in with me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my back against the wood, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. My uncle called out from his bedroom, his voice thick with sleep. "Everything all right out there?" I couldn't tell him. The words stuck in my throat. If I said, "I just saw a Bigfoot," he would have laughed. He would have thought I was crazy, or that I'd had a scare from a bear and let my imagination run wild. So I just swallowed hard and managed to croak out, "Yeah, fine. Just the dogs saw a raccoon or something, spooked them." I could hear him grunt and roll over. I stood there by the door for a long time, just listening. The dogs wouldn't settle. They paced around the main room, going from window to window, whining softly, their ears twitching at every little sound from outside. They knew what we'd seen wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't a bear. It was something else. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the couch with the maglite gripped in my hand like a club, staring at the dark square of the door, listening to the absolute silence of the woods. That silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. The next morning, everything looked normal. The sun was out, the lake was sparkling, my uncle made pancakes. It was all so ordinary, it felt like a dream, but it wasn't. I took the dogs out on their leashes again, my heart in my throat, and went back to the spot. In the daylight, it was just a patch of forest. I looked for footprints, for broken branches, for any sign. But the ground was a mess of pine needles and my own footprints from the night before. I couldn't find anything definitive. I never told my uncle. We packed up and left a couple days later, and I never went back to that cabin. For years, I tried to convince myself it was a bear. A big bear standing on its hind legs. But it didn't move like a bear. It was too upright, too still, and the eyes, the way it looked at me, that wasn't an animal's gaze, and the silence when it left. A bear doesn't move through a dry forest without making a sound. What finally cemented it for me was just a few months ago. I was browsing online, just killing time, and I stumbled onto a forum for hikers in the Sierra Nevada. And there it was, a thread from last year. People talking about strange experiences around Mammoth Lakes, specifically near Lake Mary. A couple of them mentioned seeing a large, bipedal, hairy creature watching them from the trees. One person described the same reflective eyeshine, the same feeling of being intelligently watched, the same utter silence when it moved away. Reading those accounts, my hands started to sweat. The cold feeling came back into my stomach. It wasn't just me, it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a bear. Something is out there in those woods. Something that knows how to hide, and something that every once in a while decides to let itself be seen. And on that cold black night a few years ago, it decided to let me see it. I don't know why. I'll probably never know. But I saw it, and I haven't felt truly safe in the dark since... Story 13. All right, I'm just gonna type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out there because it's been eating at me for years now. I used to own a bait and tackle shop right on the Kalama River in Kalama, Washington. It was a good life, a simple life. I knew the river, I knew the people, and I thought I knew every sound that old forest made. I was wrong. The whole thing started slowly, the way these things do. You don't just wake up one day and your world gets turned upside down. It chips away at you piece by piece until one day you look around and realize nothing is the same. It was the customers first. You get all kinds in a bait shop, liars, braggarts, the genuinely skilled and the hopelessly optimistic. But you learn to tell the difference between a tall tale and someone who's genuinely shaken. There was this one guy, a regular, a steelheader, who didn't spook easy. He came in one Tuesday morning and he was white as a ghost. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely count out his cash for a new spool of line. He told me he'd been parked up at Beginner's Hole just before sunrise, sipping his coffee in his truck, waiting for enough light to see the water. Beginner's Hole is a popular spot, a wide, deep bend in the river that's easy to access. It's usually where you send the newbies. Anyway, he said he heard this crack like a gunshot, and his whole driver's side window just spider-webbed. A rock the size of his fist was sitting on his dashboard. It had come out of the dark from the tree line. He said it wasn't thrown by a person. The force was all wrong. It was like it had been launched. He didn't even get out of the truck. He just put it in reverse and got the hell out of there. I shrugged it off. Kids with slingshots, maybe. But then another guy came in a week or so later. This one was a mess. He was a fisherman from Portland. Looked like he'd slept in his waders. He said he'd been night fishing for springers, just standing in the shallows when he saw something on the opposite bank. The moon was bright enough that he could see the silhouette clear as day. He said it was at least 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered and just covered in hair. It wasn't a bear. He kept saying that over and over. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. Bears don't watch you like that. He said it just stood there for a full minute, then turned and melted back into the shadows. He was so scared he waded back to his car, drove to the nearest 24-hour gas station 20 miles away, and sat in the lit parking lot until the sun came up. He told me he hadn't been back to the river since, and he was selling all his gear. I sold it for him on consignment. He didn't even want to see it again. That got my attention. 2 stories, same spot, both from guys who knew their way around the woods. I started paying more attention to the sounds when I'd lock up the shop at night. The Kalama is never silent. There's always the river, the wind in the cedars, the occasional hoot of an owl. But now I was hearing other things. Knocking sounds deep in the woods, like something was smacking a tree with a log, and sometimes a smell would roll down on the wind, a heavy, musky stink, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. The middle part, the part that really sealed it for me, happened on a Thursday. My beer distributor was in, dropping off a couple kegs and some cases for the small fridge I kept in the shop. He was a big, loud guy, an ex-linebacker, not afraid of anything. It was a slow afternoon, so I said, "Hey, let's go up to Beginner's Hole, see if the fish are biting." I figured the company would be good, and maybe I could see this spot for myself, see if I felt anything off. We got there around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already dipping behind the trees, casting long, deep shadows across the river. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just the rush of the water. We rigged up our rods and started casting from the bank. We were maybe 20 feet apart, not really talking, just fishing. That's when we heard the splash. It wasn't a fish. A big Chinook salmon makes a splash. A steelhead makes a swirl. This was different. This was a heavy, violent chunk of a sound, like someone had thrown a refrigerator into the river. It came from upstream, around the bend, out of our sight. My buddy froze, his rod halfway through a cast. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, we saw it. Something broke the surface of the water in the middle of the river, about 50 yards up. It was huge. It wasn't swimming like a person or an otter. It was just standing up. The water was deep there, chest deep on a tall man, and this thing rose up until it was standing waist deep. It was covered in dark, wet, matted hair. It was massive across the shoulders, with arms that were too long. It turned its head, and I saw a glimpse of a heavy brow, no neck to speak of. My beer distributor made a sound I've never heard a man make before, a kind of choked gurgle of pure terror. He dropped his rod. "It's a goddamn ape," he screamed, and his voice was so high and tight it barely sounded human. A giant ape. The thing didn't move towards us. It just stood there for a second, water streaming off its fur. Then it let out this noise. It started as a low, deep moan, the kind of sound you feel in your bones more than hear. It vibrated in my chest. Then it climbed, getting higher and higher, turning into this piercing, shrieking scream that cut through the forest silence. It was angry. It was the most hostile, terrifying sound I have ever heard. It didn't sound like any animal I know. It sounded intelligent and furious. Then the rocks started coming, not from the creature, but from the woods behind us. They were whistling through the air, smacking into trees around us with loud, solid thwacks. One hit the water right between me and my buddy with a heavy plunk. We didn't say another word. We just ran. We dropped everything, rods, tackle boxes, the whole lot, and we sprinted for my truck. I have never been so scared in my life. It was a blind, panting, heart-pounding sprint. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door unlocked. We scrambled in. I turned the key, and I peeled out of that gravel parking lot, spraying rocks everywhere. We didn't look back. We drove straight to the shop in total silence. He helped me unload his beer, his hands still trembling, and then he just got in his truck and left. He never came back to deliver to my shop again. They sent a new guy. After that, I was done. I stopped fishing for fun. I was jumpy all the time, but I still had a business to run, and part of that was guided trips. Which brings me to the last time, the time that broke me for good. It was a guided drift boat trip I'd booked months in advance. The client was a guy from Iowa, here to catch a big salmon. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to cancel, to make an excuse. But the money was good, and a part of me, the stupid part, thought maybe it was all a fluke, a series of weird coincidences we put in upstream of Beginner's Hole, planning to drift right through it. The guy from Iowa was in the front. I was on the oars in the back. It was a clear, cold night with a bright, nearly full moon that made the river look like flowing silver. We were quiet. The only sound was the oars in the water and the occasional click of his reel. We were approaching Beginner's Hole, and I could feel my skin start to crawl. The air felt thick, heavy. That musky smell was back, strong. The Iowan got a bite, a hard, solid take. He set the hook and his rod bent double. "Whoa, this is a big one," he yelled, his voice full of excitement. But it was wrong. The fight was wrong. A big fish runs, it dives, it shakes its head. This thing just felt heavy, and it wasn't moving like a fish. It was pulling in a slow, deliberate, powerful way. It wasn't trying to get away. It was just anchored. My client was grunting, straining, the reel drag screaming. Then it started coming up. Not like a fish surfacing to jump, it was just rising slowly from the deep, dark water right in the middle of the hole. The water bulged, and then this shape just stood up. It was the same thing I'd seen before, but this time it was close, maybe 30 feet from the boat. Moonlight gleamed off its wet, dark fur. It was enormous, and my client's fishing line was taut, running from his rod directly to the thing's shoulder. He had hooked it. He had hooked it right in the meat of its shoulder. For a second, everything was frozen. The Iowan was just staring, his mouth hanging open, his hands frozen on the rod. The creature was half turned towards us, and I could see its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were dark and deep, and they were looking right at us, and there was a fury in them that I can't even describe. It made a low, guttural sound, a growl that was pure rage. Then it reached up with one of those long, powerful arms and grabbed the line. It didn't snap it. It just wrapped its hand around it and pulled. The rod was nearly ripped from the Iowan's hands. Then the creature gave one massive, brutal yank, and the hook just tore free. I saw a dark patch bloom on its fur where the hook had been. It didn't run. It looked at us for one more second. A look that said everything. A look that said, "This is my place." Then it just sank straight down, disappearing under the black water without a ripple. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The only noise was the Iowan hyperventilating. He dropped the rod into the bottom of the boat like it was on fire. We just sat there, drifting. I didn't even have the strength to row. A light came on in a house up on the bank, and a local homeowner came out onto his deck, shining a flashlight down at the river. He'd heard the commotion, seen something. He just stared at us, his face a mask of horror. He'd seen it too. I finally got my wits about me and rowed us to the takeout point in silence. The guy from Iowa didn't say a single word the whole way back. He just got in his rental car and drove off. I never sent him an invoice. I never saw him again. That was it for me. I sold the guiding part of the business the next week. I stopped going up to Beginner's Hole altogether. I sold the shop a year later and moved away from the river. I can't be near that water anymore. People talk about Bigfoot like it's a myth, a fun campfire story. It's not. I don't know what it is, but it's real. It's strong, it's smart, and it's territorial. And it's out there, in those dark woods, in those deep, dark waters. I saw it stand up in the moonlight, hooked and furious. And I know, with a certainty that haunts me every single day, that we are not alone out there, and that whatever is out there with us, it doesn't want us around. Story 14. It was one of those perfect Colorado mornings in late August, the kind where the air feels clean in your lungs and the sky is so blue it almost doesn't look real. There were 6 of us, all friends from college, and we decided to hike up to Lily Lake on the south side of Mount Blanca. We'd been planning this trip for months, a last hurrah before we all got swallowed up by real jobs and real life. The hike up was exactly what you'd expect. A lot of laughing, a lot of complaining about the incline, the usual stuff. We reached the lake around midday, and it was worth every single aching muscle. The water was this incredible clear turquoise, just sitting there peacefully with the massive grey face of Blanca looming over it. We ate our sandwiches, skipped some stones, and just soaked in the sun for a good couple of hours. It was perfect. Honestly, it was one of those days you tuck away in your memory to pull out on a bad Tuesday in February. The trouble started on the way back. We'd all gotten a bit lazy and sun-drowsy from the lake, and the energy was different. The trail back is mostly downhill, and 4 of the guys, let's just say they were the more competitive ones, decided they were going to race back to the trailhead. It was stupid, but it was the kind of stupid we always did. They took off, whooping and hollering, their boots kicking up little clouds of dust on the trail. In what felt like seconds, their noise faded away, and it was just me and my friend Mark left. We've always been the slower, steadier ones. We like to actually see the woods we're walking through, you know, not just treat it like a racetrack. So we settled into a comfortable, quiet pace. The forest on that part of the mountain is a mix. You've got these big, spread-out ponderosa pines that smell like vanilla when you get close to the bark, and then thicker patches of spruce and fir that grow close together, making everything a little darker, a little cooler. The silence after the other guys left was immediate. It wasn't a bad silence at first. It was peaceful. You could hear the wind moving through the high branches, a few birds, the crunch of our own boots on the dry trail. We weren't talking much, just walking. My legs were tired, and I remember focusing on the back of Mark's green t-shirt, just putting one foot in front of the other. We'd been walking like that for maybe 20-25 minutes. The trail curved around a particularly dense patch of spruce trees on our left. The sunlight was coming through the canopy in thick golden shafts, highlighting all the dust motes in the air. It was so normal, so incredibly boringly normal. And then I saw it. My eyes were kind of glazed over, just staring at the ground a few feet ahead of my boots, when a movement in my peripheral vision snapped my head up. It came from that thick patch of spruces to our left. It was a figure. That's the only word I have for it. It jumped, or maybe it lunged, from behind one thick spruce tree to another one about 30, maybe 40 yards away from us. It wasn't a run. It was this single, decisive, powerful movement. One moment the space between the 2 trees was empty, and the next this thing was just there, having crossed the gap in a blur. My brain just froze. It completely short-circuited. The first thing that registered was the size. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least that, maybe taller. But it wasn't just tall, it was stretched out. Its limbs were separate from its body in a way that a human's aren't, or a bear's, like its arms and legs were long and lanky, and they seemed to move with their own intention. The body was dark, a muddy brownish-black color, and it was covered in what looked like shaggy hair, but it wasn't fluffy. It was matted, like a wet dog. The most chilling part, the part that still makes my stomach clench when I think about it, was the silence. There was no sound. None. When a deer bolts, you hear the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the thump of its hooves. When a squirrel darts up a tree, there's a scrabbling sound. When a person runs through the woods, they're loud as hell. They breathe heavy. They crash through undergrowth. This made no sound at all. Its movement was swift and fluid, and utterly terrifyingly silent. It didn't seem to touch the ground in a way that would make noise. It was just this powerful, silent glide from one point of cover to another. It disappeared behind the second spruce tree, and the woods were exactly as they had been 2 seconds before. The birds were still chirping, the wind was still sighing, It was as if the forest itself hadn't even noticed. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It felt like a wild animal trying to punch its way out of my ribcage. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold numbness spreading down my arms to my fingertips. Mark had frozen a step ahead of me. He'd seen it too. I saw his shoulders go rigid. He slowly, so slowly, turned his head to look at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a confusion that mirrored my own. We just stood there for what felt like a full minute, not saying a word, just staring at the spot where it had been. The air felt heavier, colder. The peaceful silence of the woods now felt like a held breath, like something was waiting. Finally, Mark let out a shaky breath. What the hell was that? I couldn't form words. I just shook my head. Was that a bear? He asked, his voice a low whisper, even though there was no one around to hear us. No, I managed to croak out. My throat was tight and dry. Bears don't move like that. They don't stand like that. And they don't. Bears are powerful, but they're stocky. Their limbs are thick and close to their bodies. This thing was all length and lean muscle. Its proportions were wrong. Then the human part of my brain, the part that desperately needed a logical explanation, kicked in. Was it your brother? I asked Mark. His younger brother, Kyle, was one of the four who had raced ahead. He was a joker, the kind of guy who would double back to scare us. Was he messing with us, wearing a ghillie suit or something? Mark's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. Yeah, that has to be it. That little shit, I'm gonna kill him. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. It was just Kyle. Of course it was. We laughed, but it was a nervous, brittle sound that didn't carry more than a few feet. It didn't erase the image burned into my retinas, the sheer, unnatural speed and silence of that thing. A person, even a fast one, can't move like that without making a sound. But we clung to the idea because the alternative was too big, too frightening to even consider. Come on, Mark said, his voice a little stronger now. Let's catch up to those idiots. We started walking again, but our pace was different. It was faster, more urgent. We weren't looking at the scenery anymore. Our eyes were constantly scanning the trees to our left, where we'd seen it. Every shadow between the trunks looked like a lurking shape. Every rustle of a leaf, which had been peaceful before, now made me jump. The comfort was gone, replaced by a low-grade, humming fear. We didn't talk. We just walked, listening, our bodies tense and ready for something. The rest of the hike was agony. Every minute felt like an hour. The forest, which had felt so welcoming and beautiful just an hour ago, now felt like a cage. The trees felt like they were watching us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark, lanky figure following us, moving from tree to tree, in perfect silence. My skin was crawling. I felt exposed, like we were being stalked. When we finally broke out of the tree line and saw the parking lot and our two cars, it was like surfacing after being underwater for too long. The four other guys were already there, leaning against the hood of Mark's Jeep, laughing and looking smug. "What took you so long, Grandpas?" one of them called out. Mark and I didn't even smile. We walked straight up to them. I could feel the adrenaline still buzzing in my veins, making my hands tremble. I shoved them in my pockets so no one would see. Mark went right up to his brother, Kyle. "What the hell, man?" he said, his voice tight. Kyle looked genuinely confused. "What? You guys are that pissed we beat you?" "The thing in the woods," I said, cutting in. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. That wasn't funny. They all looked at each other, their smiles fading, replaced by blank confusion. "What thing?" one of the other guys asked. "You," Mark said, pointing a finger at his brother. "You doubled back. You jumped between those trees to scare us. Don't even try to deny it." Kyle held his hands up. "Dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. We came straight down. We've been here for like 15 minutes. My blood went cold. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the parking lot. "What were you wearing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kyle looked at me like I was insane. "This?" he said, plucking at his t-shirt. It was a bright, fire engine red. Red. The thing we saw was a dark, matted, brownish black. There was no red. There were no colors at all. It was just shadow and shape. Mark and I looked at each other, all the color drained from his face again. I saw my own terror reflected in his eyes. The joking relief we'd felt on the trail evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of dread in my gut. It wasn't a prank. Kyle had been here in his red shirt the whole time. The others started asking questions, their voices overlapping. "What did you see? Was it a bear? You guys look like you've seen a ghost." But Mark and I couldn't answer. We just stood there, shell-shocked. How do you explain it? How do you put into words that you saw something that moved in a way nothing should be able to move, with a silence that was more frightening than any sound? That for a few seconds, the world didn't operate by the rules you've always known. The drive home was quiet. Everyone else eventually dropped it, chalking it up to us being tired and seeing things. But Mark and I knew. We didn't need to talk about it, we just knew. It's been over a year now. I've tried to rationalize it. A weird shadow, a trick of the light, a moose. But moose are huge and make a hell of a lot of noise, and they don't have that separated, lanky-limbed build. I've looked up every animal in Colorado, and nothing fits. Nothing moves with that kind of silent, decisive power. The memory of it doesn't fade. If anything, it's gotten clearer. I can close my eyes and see it right now. That dark form stretched out in that single fluid jump. I can feel the absolute dead silence that accompanied it. That's the part that haunts me the most, I think. The silence. In a world that's always full of noise, that complete and total absence of sound was the most unnatural thing I've ever experienced. I don't go into the deep woods anymore. I stick to busy, popular trails, and I'm always listening, always watching the spaces between the trees, because I know with a certainty that sits cold in my bones that something is out there, something that moves in silence and doesn't want to be seen, and we saw it. Story 15. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before. I usually just read these stories and feel a chill, but then I go about my day. What happened to me? I can't just keep it to myself anymore. I need to get it out there. Maybe writing it down will help. I don't know, but I swear on everything I hold dear, this is the truth. This happened. I was living in Mammoth Lakes at the time. It was a good period in my life. I had a little cabin just outside of town, worked a basic job to pay the bills, and spent most of my free time outside. My big thing was fishing. Not so much for the catch, but for the quiet. The absolute silence you can only find when you're miles from anyone, with just the sound of the water and the wind in the pines. This particular day, I decided to hike into Laurel Canyon. It's a beautiful spot, but the terrain is no joke. It's all uneven ground, these hidden gullies and sudden drops covered in pine needles, so you're constantly watching your feet. The trail isn't really a trail in some parts, more like a suggestion worn by deer. I'd spent the whole afternoon by this one deep pool I'd found a few weeks back. The fishing was slow, but the peace was total. I remember the sun was starting to dip behind the canyon walls, and that's when you know it's time to pack up. The temperature drops fast, and the light goes from golden to gray in what feels like minutes. I packed my gear, slung my backpack on, and started the trek back to where I'd parked my truck on the old Forest Service road. That walk back always felt longer. My legs were tired from navigating the tricky ground, and the backpack with my waders and gear felt heavier than it had on the way in. The air was getting that crisp, cold bite to it, the kind that makes you zip your jacket all the way up. I remember the smell so clearly, damp earth, cold pine, and that distinct, clean scent of mountain evening. I was in my own head, thinking about nothing much, just putting one foot in front of the other, listening to the crunch of my boots and my own breathing. I finally got to my truck, this beat-up old Ford Ranger. I tossed my gear in the back, got in, and just sat for a second, letting the warmth come back into my fingers. I started the engine. The headlights cut 2 bright tunnels through the growing dark, and I began the slow, bumpy drive down the dirt road towards the main highway. I had the window cracked, and the cold air was pouring in, mixing with the heat from the vents. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station that was mostly static, but I kept it for the company. It was that time they called dusk, but it felt more like the world was holding its breath. The sky was still a deep, bruised blue overhead, but down in the canyon, the shadows were pooling into solid black. The headlights only showed me what was immediately in front of me, the dirt road, the ditches on either side, and the wall of trees. And then I saw it. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a shape, a disruption in the periphery. I slowed down, my foot easing off the gas, thinking it was a deer. You see a lot of deer out there, especially around this time, but this was wrong. This was all wrong. It stepped out from the tree line on the right side of the road. It didn't emerge. It didn't wander. It stepped, one fluid, powerful motion from the absolute black of the woods into the dim light of my headlights. It was tall. So damn tall. My mind immediately started screaming, "Bear!" But bears don't walk on 2 legs like that. Not for more than a step or two. This thing was upright, and its walk... God, its walk. It's the thing that haunts me the most. It wasn't a human walk. It wasn't a smooth, balanced stride. It was this bent-forward, exaggerated gait. Its legs seemed to lift too high. Its upper body leaned way over, like it was fighting a strong wind, but the air was dead still. The best way I can describe it, and I know how stupid this sounds, is that it moved like a cartoon character trying to sneak somewhere, but there was nothing funny about it. It was all wrong. A clumsy, powerful, unnatural motion. My truck was still rolling forward, and as it got closer to the center of my beams, the details snapped into a horrifying focus. It was covered in hair or fur, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear. It was tight to its body, and it was black. Not brown, not grizzly-colored, but a solid, deep, light-swallowing black, and it was muscular. I could see the definition in its shoulders and back, the way the powerful muscles moved under that dark hide. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were massive, just these huge slabs of muscle, and its head, it had no neck. Its head was set directly on its shoulders, like a boulder placed on a shelf. It was blocky, and I couldn't make out any face, no eyes, no mouth, just a dark shape. It must have weighed 500 pounds, easy. It had that dense, heavy look, like a professional weightlifter covered in tar. It crossed the road in maybe 3 or 4 of those loping, exaggerated steps. It never looked at me. It just moved with a purpose, from the trees on my right, across the 20-foot wide road, and into the trees on my left. It disappeared into the shadows between the pines like it had never been there. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic, painful rhythm. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I'd come to a complete stop without even realizing it. The truck was just idling in the middle of the dirt road. My mind was a scrambled mess. Bear. It was a bear, a weird bear, a sick bear. But I've seen bears. I know how they move. This wasn't that. This was something else. I just sat there, staring at the spot where it had vanished. The static from the radio seemed louder. The cold from the open window felt like it was seeping into my bones. I should have put the truck in drive. I should have floored it. But I was frozen, paralyzed by this cold, creeping disbelief. And then it came back. It stepped out of the woods on the left, back into the edge of my headlights. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same creature. There was no doubt. But its movement was different, completely different. Before, it had been that strange, almost clumsy, loping gait. Now, it was slow, deliberate, controlled. It moved back across the road from my left to my right, but it wasn't just crossing. It was cautious. Its steps were careful. Its massive body seemed to be minimizing its presence. It was like it was trying to avoid attention. and as it reached the middle of the road, its head turned. It wasn't a full turn, it was just a slight, deliberate rotation of that blocky, necklace head. It scanned the area. I can't say it looked at me because I couldn't see its eyes. There were no glowing orbs, no reflective shine, just darkness, but I felt it. In that moment, in the pit of my stomach, I felt a wave of primal, ice-cold terror that I have never felt before or since. It knew I was there. It was aware of me. Its initial crossing had been indifferent, but this return trip was different. It was checking, it was assessing. The sheer intelligence in that simple, scanning turn of the head was what shattered any last notion that this was just a bear. Animals don't do that. They don't double back with that kind of stealthy purpose. They don't survey their surroundings with that level of calm awareness. The entire sequence, from the first time I saw it to when it disappeared back into the trees on the right, couldn't have lasted more than 20 seconds, maybe 30. But it felt like an hour, a lifetime of dread compressed into half a minute. Then it was gone. The woods on the right swallowed it whole again. The road was empty, just a dirt track in the headlights. The spell broke. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I had to get a picture. I had to have proof. I unlocked it, my thumb slipping on the screen, opened the camera app and pointed it at the woods. I zoomed in. I scanned the tree line. Nothing, just blackness and the vague shapes of tree trunks. It was useless. The thing was gone. The darkness was absolute. I remember a wave of frustration so sharp it felt like a physical pain. No one would believe me. I had nothing. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and slammed my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt for a second before catching. I didn't care about the bumps or the ruts. I drove that road like a madman, my eyes flicking between the path ahead and the woods on either side, expecting to see it again standing there watching me go. I didn't slow down until my tires hit the smooth asphalt of the main highway. I didn't look back. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I remember my whole body was trembling. Not just shivering from the cold, but a deep, internal tremor of shock and fear. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a tall, black shape loping behind the truck. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, and coming up completely empty. A person in a suit? No. The size, the muscle, the way it moved, it was all real, all living, breathing muscle and power. A bear? Impossible. I got back to my cabin, ran inside, and locked the door. I didn't even unpack my gear from the truck. I just sat at my kitchen table in the dark, listening to the sound of my own heart. I felt violated. That's the only word for it. The peace I had always found in those woods was gone, shattered. That canyon, which had been my sanctuary, was now a place of profound, unknowable terror. I've never gone back to Laurel Canyon. I sold my fishing gear not long after. I even moved away from Mammoth Lakes a year later. I told a couple of close friends about it, and they gave me that look, the one that says they think you're either crazy or you had a little too much to drink. So I stopped talking about it, but I still see it. Every time I close my eyes, I see that bent forward, exaggerated gait. I see the way its head turned, just slightly, scanning the road. I feel that same ice in my veins. It solidified a fear in me that I didn't know I could have, a fear of the unknown, of the things that live in the deep shadows of places we think we know. We think we're the ones in control, that we've mapped everything out, but we haven't. There are things out there in the old, wild places, and sometimes, for just 20 seconds on a cold evening, they decide to step out and show you that you know nothing at all. Story 16. All right, I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess it's time to just type it out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out of my head and into words. My name is Shannon Morgan. And this happened to me and my brother when we were kids, back in the early 70s. We lived in northern Idaho, right near Rapid Lightning Creek in Bonner County. It was a place we knew like the backs of our hands, or at least we thought we did. That day started out perfect. It was one of those warm, late summer days where the air feels thick and sweet, and the sun cuts through the pine trees in these long, lazy beams. I must have been about 10, and my brother was 12. We'd been pestering our dad to let us take Old Scout, our horse, out for a ride. He was a big, gentle bay, usually calm as anything. We'd ridden him double 100 times before, me sitting in front and my brother behind holding the reins. We set out after lunch, the smell of pine needles and warm earth filling our noses. The plan was just to follow the creek for a bit, maybe go up to the old logging road and back. Nothing crazy. We were laughing, joking around, the way kids do when they're let loose in the woods. The only sounds were the crunch of Scout's hooves on the forest floor, the buzz of insects, and the constant, comforting rush of Rapid Lightning Creek off to our left. We'd been out for maybe an hour, just meandering, not really going anywhere fast. I remember the feeling of the sun on my bare arms, the rough texture of Scout's mane under my fingers. My brother was pointing out a squirrel chattering at us from a ponderosa pine. Everything was normal. So normal. Then, without any warning at all, Scout just froze. It wasn't a gradual thing. 1 second he was walking, his big body swaying gently beneath us, and the next he was rigid, every muscle in his body locked up. I felt his sides heave under my legs, a huge shuddering breath. I started to say, "What's wrong with..." but I never finished. He let out this sound, this high-pitched, terrified whinny that I'd never heard from him before. It was a scream, pure and simple. Then he reared. It wasn't a little hop. He went straight up, his front legs pawing at the air. There was no holding on. My brother's grip on the reins vanished, and I was thrown backward into him, and we both tumbled off. It was a blur of sky, hooves, and then the hard, jarring impact with the ground. We landed in a patch of soft brush and pine needles, which was lucky. The wind was knocked out of me, and for a second I just lay there, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the thunder of Scout's hooves fading fast, the sound of him crashing through the undergrowth back the way we came, back toward home. He was gone. My brother scrambled up first. "Shannon, you okay?" he asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, pushing myself up. My elbow was scraped and stinging, and my jeans were dirty. But nothing was broken. We were both just stunned. Why did he do that? Scout was the calmest horse. He'd never spooked like that, not even when a grouse burst out right in front of him. The woods were suddenly very, very quiet. The insects had stopped buzzing. The squirrel was gone. The only sound was the creek, which seemed louder now, more insistent. We looked at each other, the same confused fear in our eyes. We were miles from home. We knew the way, of course. We'd walked it before, but walking it without a horse felt different, more exposed. "We gotta follow the creek," my brother said, trying to sound brave, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. "We'll be okay." So we started walking. The trail Scout had taken was easy to follow at first, a mess of churned-up dirt and broken branches. But after a few minutes it faded, and we were just two kids walking through the woods, following the sound of the water. The comfort I usually felt in these woods was gone. It felt like the trees were watching us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my skin prickling. I told myself I was being stupid. It was just the quiet and the shock of being thrown. We walked for what felt like a long time, not talking much. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that made every stump and rock look like something else. The creek bent ahead of us, a sharp curve where the water had carved out the bank over the years. We were going to have to go around it, and the path got a little narrower, crowded with alder bushes. We pushed through the last of the bushes, stepping out into a slightly more open area along the creek bank. And that's when we saw it. We both stopped dead at the exact same time, my feet just rooted to the ground. My brain couldn't make sense of what my eyes were seeing. About 30 yards away, on the other side of the creek, was a figure. It was standing upright, bent over at the waist, its back to us. It was huge. I mean, massively huge. It was tall, way taller than my dad, who was 6 feet. This thing had to be 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall, and it was built. Broad shoulders, a thick torso, and its arms. They were long and heavy, hanging down past its knees. It was covered from head to toe in hair, not fur, but long, shaggy black hair. It was matted and wet in places. It was scooping water from the creek with its hand. Not cupped hands like a person, but more like I don't know, a big, deliberate scoop. It would bring its hand to its mouth, and I could see the water dripping from its face. It moved with this weird, fluid ease. It wasn't clumsy. It was graceful, powerful, like it belonged there more than the trees or the rocks did. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared. My brother was beside me, and I could feel him trembling. We were completely frozen. It was the most terrifying and awe-inspiring thing I had ever seen. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand and drink like that. This wasn't a man in a suit. The scale was all wrong. The way it moved was all wrong. We must have made a sound. A gasp, a rustle of leaves, something, because it stopped. It straightened up. It didn't jerk or startle. It just rose, slowly. It turned its head, and then its whole body pivoted to face us. That was the worst part, seeing its front. It was just as massive from the front, a wall of dark hair. I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, just dark patches in a face that was mostly covered, but I could feel it looking at us. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. It didn't roar, it didn't charge, it didn't show any fear or aggression at all. It just looked at us for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. Its calmness was the most chilling thing I have ever experienced. We were nothing to it, just 2 small, insignificant creatures that had interrupted its drink. Then it turned and started to walk away, not run, walk. It took these long, effortless strides, its arms swinging slightly at its sides. It stepped right into the creek, the water coming up to its shins, and it didn't even break stride. It crossed the creek in a few steps, climbed the opposite bank without a single misstep, and just melted into the trees. It didn't crash through the brush. 1 second it was there, a massive black shape against the green, and the next it was just gone. The forest swallowed it up without a sound. We stood there for I don't know how long. Minutes. My legs were like jelly. The image of it turning, of it walking away so calmly, was burned into my mind. The silence that followed was heavier than any silence I'd ever heard. The creek sounded different. The woods felt different. Finally, my brother grabbed my arm. His hand was ice cold. "We have to go," he whispered, and his voice was hoarse. We didn't run. We just started walking faster and faster back along the creek, not saying a word. We didn't look back. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart leap into my throat. I expected to see it again, to see it following us. But we saw nothing. Just the ordinary woods, which didn't feel ordinary anymore. We got home just as the sun was dipping below the mountains. Scout was already in his corral, covered in sweat and still looking spooked. Our parents were frantic. We were pale and shaking, and we just blurted it out, our story tumbling over itself. They listened, their faces going from worried to confused to, I don't know, dismissive isn't the right word. They believed we saw something. They just didn't know what. Dad went out with his rifle the next day, but he didn't find any tracks, nothing. The ground was too rocky by the creek. We never talked about it much after that, me and my brother. We didn't have to. It was this shared, unspoken thing that hung between us for the rest of our lives. We'd just look at each other sometimes, and I knew he was thinking about it too, that massive, black, upright figure drinking from the creek like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the way it just looked at us before it walked away. So calm, so utterly sure of itself. I'm an old woman now. I've lived a whole life since that day. I've had kids, grandkids. I've seen the world change in ways I never could have imagined back then, but I've never seen anything like that again, and I've never, for a single day, been able to explain what it was we saw, standing in the water of Rapid Lightning Creek. It was just there, and then it was gone. And I've been trying to understand it ever since. Story 17. It was the summer of 2011. My friend, she was going through a rough patch with her family and asked if she could camp in my backyard for a few weeks. I live in a rural part of Ohio. My property backs up onto a pretty dense stretch of woods. So it's not like she was in some suburban cul-de-sac. It's isolated out here. I figured, why not? It's safe. Or I thought it was. She started mentioning things almost right away. She'd text me in the middle of the night, saying she heard footsteps, not like a deer or a raccoon. These were heavy. Thump, thump, thump. She said it sounded like something walking on two legs, just circling her tent. I'd be half asleep in my bed and I'd get these messages. I brushed it off. I told her it was probably a deer. They can sound surprisingly loud, or maybe a stray dog. I told her the woods are full of noises. I genuinely believed that. I thought she was just spooking herself, being out there alone in the dark. But then one night, it must have been around 2 in the morning, my phone starts blowing up. Not texts, but actual calls. I fumble for it, my heart already starting to race just from the sound. It's her, and she's whispering, but it's this frantic, panicked whisper. She's telling me there's something right outside her tent. She can hear it sniffing, this wet, heavy, snuffling sound right against the nylon, and breathing, this deep, rhythmic, heavy breathing like something with a massive chest. She said she could feel the heat of its breath through the fabric. That got me out of bed. The fear in her voice was real. It was contagious. It wasn't just, I'm scared of the dark fear. It was pure primal terror. I grabbed the big Maglite flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went out the back door. The second the porch light came on and my feet hit the deck, everything went silent. The woods were just quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. I shone the flashlight around her tent, the beam shaking because my hand was shaking. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. I walked over to her tent and she unzipped it. Her face was white as a sheet. She was trembling all over. We both stood there for a minute, listening, but there was nothing. Just the normal crickets starting up again. I told her it was probably a curious coyote, but I didn't believe it. Coyotes don't sound that big. They don't make the ground feel like it's vibrating. Things settled down after that. She stopped camping not long after, found another place to stay. I put it out of my mind. Life moved on. We got a puppy, a little golden retriever that fall, which brings me to the night everything changed for me. The night I saw it. It was November of 2012, a cold, clear night. The moon was almost full, so it was casting this pale bluish light over everything. I remember the exact date because it was the week before Thanksgiving. My husband and son were already asleep upstairs. I was watching TV in the living room when the puppy started whining by the back door. He needed to go out. I sighed, paused my show, and pulled on my boots and a heavy coat over my pajamas. I grabbed my headlamp from the hook by the door. It was one of those LED ones that straps to your forehead. I stepped out onto the back deck. The air was sharp and cold. It felt good in my lungs. The puppy bounded down the steps into the yard and immediately started doing his business. I stood on the deck, hugging myself against the chill, my breath making little clouds in the headlamp's beam. The yard was quiet, peaceful. I remember looking up at the stars, thinking how pretty it was. Then I heard it. From the tree line, maybe 50 feet away, there was a rustling in the brush, not a small rustle. This was a loud, deliberate crunching sound, like something big was pushing its way through the thicket of briars and young saplings that marked the edge of my property. The puppy heard it too. He froze, his little body going stiff, and let out a low growl. That wasn't like him. He was a friendly dog. My first thought was, damn deer. I turned my head, aiming the headlamp beam toward the sound. Hey! I called out half-heartedly, thinking I'd scare whatever it was off. The rustling stopped. For a second, everything was still again. Then the bushes directly where I was looking, they parted and something stood up. It was fast. 1 second there was nothing. The next, this figure just rose up from the ground. It was huge. I mean massive. My brain short-circuited. It was like my thoughts just turned to static. The headlamp beam caught it directly. It was easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was just this broad, dark silhouette against the deeper darkness of the woods. The moonlight caught the edges of it, outlining this immense, powerful shape. It had wide, rounded shoulders and no visible neck. It was covered in what looked like dark, matted hair, but in the light, it was just a shaggy, black shape. I couldn't see a face, not clearly. It was just a darker patch in the shadow of its head, but I felt it looking at me. I felt its attention like a physical weight, this intense, intelligent focus. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. This was different. A sound came out of me then. It wasn't a word. It was this strangled, guttural scream that I didn't even recognize as my own voice. It was pure, undiluted fear, a noise my body made without any permission from my brain. My legs were moving before I even had a thought. I shrieked for the puppy. "Baxter! Baxter, come!" He was already bolting for the deck, his little legs a blur. I turned and I ran. I didn't look back. I slammed through the back door, fumbling with the lock, my hands so numb with terror I could barely make my fingers work. I finally got it locked, and then I just stood there, my back against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. I was gasping for air, my whole body shaking violently. The puppy was hiding behind the couch, whining. My husband came thundering down the stairs, my son right behind him. They were yelling, "What happened? What's wrong?" I just pointed a trembling finger at the back door, babbling about something in the yard, something huge. I couldn't even form the words properly. My husband, God bless him, he's a skeptic. He grabbed the shotgun from the closet and the big spotlight we use for checking the property. My son, he was a teenager then, he grabbed a baseball bat. They unlocked the door and went out there. I stayed inside, peeking through the kitchen window, my hands still shaking so bad I could barely hold the curtain back. I watched the spotlight beam sweep across the yard. It moved over the grass, the trees, the briar patch. Nothing. Then my husband and my son stopped at the edge of the tree line. They were talking, their voices low murmurs I couldn't make out. The spotlight was pointed up the hillside that leads deeper into the woods. My son later told me what he saw. He said Dad was scanning the hill with the light, and he saw it. Not the thing itself, but its shadow, a huge, moving shadow, cast by the moonlight, gliding up the hillside between the trees. It was moving fast. Just this massive dark shape slipping through the woods without making a sound. He said it sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He said he suddenly felt watched from all directions. He said it was a feeling of being prey. He looked at my husband and just said, "That wasn't a bear, Dad." And my husband, the ultimate skeptic, just nodded. He didn't say a word. He knew. They came back inside after 10 minutes or so, their faces serious. My husband locked the door, put the shotgun away, and just said, "We're not going out there at night anymore." That was it. No jokes, no explanations. That more than anything scared me. Because if he was taking it seriously, then it was real. That night solidified it for me. It wasn't just my friends' stories anymore. It wasn't just a weird noise. I had seen it. My son had seen its shadow. We had all felt its presence. This thing, whatever it was, had been on my property. It had been watching us. The encounters stacked up. My friend that summer, me in November, my son seeing the shadow. It was a pattern, a recurring presence. I don't know what it was. People talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I didn't believe in any of that before. Now, I don't know what else to call it. It was big, it was bipedal, it was intelligent enough to hide and watch, and it terrified me to my very core. I still live here. I still have to take the dog out at night, but I'm never casual about it. I never just stand on the deck and look at the stars. I'm vigilant. My eyes are constantly scanning the tree line, my ears straining for any sound that's out of place. I always have a light, and I never ever go out without my phone. The fear from that night in November 2012 never really left me. It's just a part of me now. This low-level hum of anxiety that spikes every time I hear a branch snap in the woods behind my house. I saw something that can't be explained, something that shouldn't exist, and it looked right back at me. And sometimes, late at night, I can still feel it watching. Story 18. It was one of those late October afternoons where the air starts getting that real bite to it. The kind that makes your breath cloud up in front of your face. I was 17 and I'd been sitting in my tree stand since about 3 in the afternoon. This was on our property, a good chunk of wooded land in eastern Ohio. My parents were out for the evening, some school event for my little sister, so I had the place to myself and figured I'd try my luck for a deer. The stand was my favorite, one my dad and I built a few years back. It's nestled right where a thick patch of white pines meets the older hardwood trees. From up there, maybe 15 feet off the ground, you can see a couple of the main deer trails and a narrow dirt path that cuts through the woods. I'd been up there plenty of times, always felt safe, always felt like it was my spot. That day, everything was normal at first. I remember the sounds, the rustle of squirrels in the dry leaves, the occasional call of a crow way off in the distance. The sun was going down, painting the sky in these weak oranges and purples, and the shadows were getting long and deep. I was just starting to think about packing it in. The light was fading fast, and it gets dark quick once the sun dips below the ridge. That's when I first heard it. It wasn't a normal sound. It was a heavy rustling, like something big was moving through the underbrush, but it was the rhythm that was wrong. It wasn't the light, skittering steps of a deer or even the clumsy trot of a bear. This was slower, more deliberate, and then there was this sound, this low, deep grunt. It wasn't a pig grunt, it was lower, guttural, like it came from a chest way bigger than any animal I knew. It was coming from maybe 200 yards off to my left, deep in the pines where it's always kind of dark. My first thought, my trying to be normal thought, was that it was a big buck, maybe one with a respiratory infection, or even a rabid dog. I gripped my bow a little tighter and tried to peer into the shadows, but my heart was already starting to beat a little faster, a dull thudding in my ears. The woods had gone quiet, the squirrels had stopped, the birds were gone. That's the first real sign, you know, when the woods go dead silent. It's like everything else knows to hide. The grunting came again, closer this time. 150 yards maybe. It was a horrible sound, wet and deep. I could feel it in my ribs. I remember shifting my weight as slowly as I could on the wooden platform of the stand, the creak it made sounding like a gunshot in the silence. I had my hunting knife on my belt, a solid buck knife, and my hand went down to the handle, just to feel it there. It was cold. Then it stopped. The grunting, the movement, everything just stopped. For a full minute, maybe 2, there was nothing, just this oppressive waiting silence. I held my breath, my ears straining so hard they hurt. I was staring so hard into the gloom of the pine patch that the shadows started to swim and move on their own. I was convincing myself I'd spooked it, whatever it was. My muscles were starting to unclench a little when the scream happened. It wasn't a scream, that's the only word I have for it, but it wasn't from any throat I can imagine. It was high-pitched, unbelievably powerful. And it didn't sound animal or human. It was this shrieking, wailing sound that cut right through me. It felt like it vibrated in my teeth. It was close, way too close, and it was filled with this, I don't know, this pure rage, this fury. I actually flinched back, banging my elbow against the tree trunk behind me. A jolt of pain shot up my arm, but I barely felt it. The fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in my stomach, locking my joints. As the scream was still echoing, tearing through the quiet woods, something huge burst out from the edge of the pine patch. It came out onto the dirt path, and it was running on 2 legs. I only saw it for maybe 3 seconds, 4 at the most, but every detail is burned into my head. It was massive, taller and broader than any man. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was covered in dark hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was stringy, almost shaggy, and it was a dark brown, nearly black. It didn't run like a man either. It was this powerful, loping sprint, its arms pumping, its head kind of low. It was unbelievably fast. The path is maybe 20 feet wide at that point, from the tree line on one side to the thick brush on the other. This thing covered that entire distance in 3 steps. 3. Its legs were so long, its stride was impossible. It wasn't a jump. It was just its running gait. 1 step put it in the middle of the path. The next was almost to the other side, and the third took it crashing back into the trees. The sound of it moving through the forest wasn't the careful snapping of branches a deer makes. It was a crashing, a smashing. It was like it didn't care what was in its way. It just plowed through it, and then it was gone. The crashing sounds got fainter, moving away fast, deeper into the woods, but the screaming didn't stop. It did this again, that same ear-splitting shriek, but now it was farther away, echoing back at me from the hills. It was a sound of pure, raw power, and it was leaving. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen solid in that tree stand, my back pressed against the rough bark of the tree. My hand was still clamped on the handle of my knife, my knuckles white. My other hand was gripping my bow so tight the metal felt like it was bending. I was shaking, a full-body tremble that I had no control over. My teeth were chattering. I remember the taste in my mouth, coppery and sour, and I realized I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only a minute or 2. The woods were still dead silent. The only sound was the fading echo of that scream in my head and the ragged, panicked gasps of my own breathing. I was crying. I didn't even realize it at first, but hot tears were streaming down my cold face. I wasn't sobbing. It was just this silent, terrified leaking. My brain was screaming at me to move, to get down, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. Every instinct was telling me that if I moved, if I made a sound, it would hear me and come back. I kept staring at the spot where it had disappeared, expecting it to come charging back out at any second. Finally, a different kind of panic set in, the thought of being stuck up in this tree in the dark. The sun was basically gone now, just a faint glow on the horizon. It was getting colder. I couldn't stay there. I had to get home. Moving was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to make myself let go of the knife. My fingers were stiff. I slung my bow over my shoulder, my hands fumbling with the strap. I didn't even think about climbing down the proper way with the safety harness. I just grabbed the top of the ladder and swung my legs over, scrambling down so fast I slipped on the last few rungs and landed hard on the ground. The impact jarred my knees and sent a shock up my spine. I didn't look back. I didn't look towards the pine patch. I just ran. I ran like I've never run before, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise, not following the path. I was running blind, branches whipping my face and arms, tearing at my jacket. I could feel the cold air burning in my lungs. I fell once, tripping over a root, and scrambled back to my feet without even stopping, my palms scraped and stinging. The sight of our backyard light, a single yellow bulb over the porch, was the most beautiful and relieving thing I've ever seen. I burst out of the tree line and sprinted across the lawn, my legs feeling like jelly. I slammed into the back door, fumbling with the handle, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the knob. I fell inside, into the kitchen, and slammed the door shut behind me, twisting the deadbolt. I stood there in the dark, my back against the door, gulping in air. I was safe. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I flipped on every light switch I could find, the bright, artificial light hurting my eyes. I ran to the front door and locked that too. Then I remembered my parents weren't home. The emptiness of the house suddenly felt huge and threatening. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator made me jump. I was still shaking, still crying. I couldn't be alone. I needed to be with someone, anyone. I looked out the kitchen window. Old Man Miller's house, our nearest neighbor, had a light on downstairs. His house was maybe 100 yards away across a field. I didn't even think. I ran out the front door, not even bothering to lock it, and sprinted across the field. The grass was wet with dew, soaking my pants, but I didn't care. I hammered on his door, probably sounding like a maniac. He opened it after a minute. An old guy in a bathrobe, holding a remote control. The sound of a TV game show was blaring behind him. I must have been a sight, covered in dirt and leaves. My face streaked with tears and probably a little blood from the branches. Breathing like I'd just run a marathon, I just started babbling. There's something in the woods. It screamed. It was huge. It ran on 2 legs. He just stared at me for a second, his brow furrowed. Whoa, whoa, slow down, kid. What are you talking about? I tried to catch my breath, the words tumbling out. I was in my tree stand. I heard this grunting, and then it screamed, this thing. It came out on the path. It was bigger than a person, covered in hair, and it ran across the path in like 3 steps. I was waiting for him to laugh, to tell me it was a bear, to dismiss me, but he didn't. His face got serious. He looked past me, out into the dark field towards the woods. What did the scream sound like, he asked, his voice low. I described it as best I could. That high-pitched, powerful wail that wasn't like anything else. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. Then he nodded, slowly. I heard it, he said. About 10-15 minutes ago, I was in the kitchen getting a drink. I heard it, way off. Sounded unnatural. Not a fox, not a bobcat. Nothing I've ever heard in 60 years of living here. He looked back at me, and his eyes were dead serious. You weren't imagining things, son. Him saying that, him confirming it, was almost as terrifying as seeing the thing itself, because it meant it was real. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the light. This thing, this impossible thing, was out there. I stayed on his couch until my parents got home. I called them from his phone, my voice still shaky, and just said I was at the Millers and I needed them to come get me. When they arrived, I tried to tell them what happened. My dad just kept saying it must have been a big buck, that I was tired, that the shadows can play tricks on you at dusk. My mom was worried, but I could tell she thought I'd just gotten spooked by a bear and let my imagination run wild. They didn't believe me. Not really. They believed I was scared, but they didn't believe what I was scared of. We went home, and I slept with the light on that night. I didn't sleep much. That was years ago. I don't hunt anymore. I don't even like going into those woods. I moved away for college and only go back to visit. My parents still think it was a bear, or maybe a particularly large coyote. And over time, I just stopped talking about it, because what's the point? But I know what I saw. I know the feeling of that scream vibrating in my bones. I know the image of that huge, dark shape moving with that impossible speed. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, on a quiet night when the wind is just right, I think I can still hear that scream, way off in the distance, and the fear comes right back, fresh and cold as it was that day. I never saw it again. I never heard it again, but I know it's out there. Story 19. The property was surrounded by this tall chain-link fence, maybe 10 feet high, with barbed wire on top, and there were signs everywhere warning about armed guards and trespassing. I remember feeling a little nervous about it. But my friend was always the brave one, or maybe just more reckless. He said it was just a scare tactic, that nobody would actually be patrolling that deep in the woods, so we found a spot where the fence was loose near the ground, probably from animals digging, and we squeezed under it. It was a tight fit, and I scraped my elbow on a rock, but we made it through. The air inside felt different right away, colder, heavier, like we'd stepped into another world. The trees were thicker, older looking, with lots of pine and oak, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of damp leaves that muffled our footsteps. We started walking deeper in, keeping low and quiet. I had my bow, a simple recurve model I'd saved up for, and my friend had his too. We were both carrying arrows in quivers on our backs, and we'd practiced enough to feel confident we could hit a squirrel from 20 or 30 feet. The plan was to bag a few, maybe cook them up later if we found a safe spot. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, and it was quiet except for the occasional bird chirp or rustle in the underbrush. I remember the smell, damp earth, pine needles and something else, kind of metallic, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We'd been walking for maybe half an hour when we spotted our first squirrel. It was perched on a branch, nibbling on a nut, and my friend gestured for me to take the shot. I drew my bow, focused, and let the arrow fly. It missed, hitting the tree trunk with a thud, and the squirrel scampered away. We both laughed softly, the tension easing a bit. We moved on, trying to stay alert, but after a while it felt like any other hunting trip. We saw a few more squirrels, but they were quick, and we didn't have any luck. Then, as we rounded a large oak tree, I saw something that made my blood run cold. About 100 feet away, there was this thing. At first, I thought it was a bear, but it was standing upright, tall, maybe 7 feet or so, with reddish-brown hair covering its body. It was chewing on a piece of tree bark, moving its jaw side to side, like a cow or a deer would, slow, rhythmic, almost peaceful. But its face, God, its face was what got me. It looked like a mix between a gorilla and a human, with deep-set eyes that seemed too intelligent and a broad, flat nose. The hair on its head was matted, and I could see muscles shifting under its fur as it chewed. I froze completely, my breath catching in my throat. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst out. I must have made a noise or something because my friend turned to see what I was staring at. His eyes went wide, and he whispered, "Holy shit, is that what I think it is?" He didn't wait for an answer. He started knocking an arrow, his hands shaking but determined. I remember the sound of the arrow clicking into place, so loud in the silence. He was aiming, and I could see the excitement in his eyes. He wanted to kill it, to be the guy who brought down a Bigfoot, to get famous or something. I felt a surge of panic. This wasn't right. It felt wrong, like we were intruding on something sacred. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this thought just slammed into my mind. It wasn't a voice, not like hearing someone speak, but more like a wave of meaning that filled my head. Clear as day, I felt the words, "If you hurt me, I'm going to kill you both." It was calm, no anger, just a straightforward statement, like it was stating a fact. And it was directed at me. I could feel it. My whole body went icy, and I let out this involuntary scream, a raw, terrified sound that ripped out of me. I don't even remember deciding to move. I just lunged at my friend, grabbing his bow and yanking it away from him. The arrow clattered to the ground, and I shouted, "Run! We have to run now!" He looked at me like I was crazy, but he saw the terror on my face and didn't argue. We turned and bolted, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about noise or direction anymore. Branches slapped against my face and arms, scratching me, but I didn't feel any pain, just this overwhelming fear that something was right behind us. I could hear heavy footsteps thudding on the ground, but when I glanced back, I didn't see anything chasing us. It was like the sound was in my head, mixed with the echo of that telepathic message. My lungs burned, and my legs felt weak, like they might give out any second, but I kept pushing, fueled by pure adrenaline. We ran for what felt like forever, stumbling over roots and rocks until we finally reached the fence. We scrambled under it, tearing our clothes on the barbed wire, and didn't stop until we were back on the road, panting and sweating. I collapsed on the grass, my whole body shaking, and my friend was just staring at me, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he kept saying, over and over. I couldn't answer. I was too busy trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened. That mental communication, it wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. It was real, vivid, and it left this residue in my mind like a ghostly imprint. We walked home in silence, both of us too freaked out to talk. When we got to my house, my mom was in the kitchen and she took one look at us, dirty, scratched up and wide-eyed, and asked what happened. We tried to explain, stumbling over our words, telling her about the creature and the telepathic threat. She just shook her head and said we'd been watching too many scary movies, that we probably saw a bear and let our imaginations run wild. My friend's parents said the same thing. Nobody believed us. They thought we were making up stories to cover for skipping school. But I knew what I saw, what I felt. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that face, those eyes, and hear that message in my head. It wasn't until years later that I learned the property was actually a chemical plant with government ties, some kind of research facility from what I heard. That got me thinking. Was it a real Bigfoot or something else? A costume, an experiment? But the telepathy, that's what I can't explain. It wasn't a trick. It was too direct, too personal. To this day, I have no idea what it was, but the terror of that moment, the calm way it threatened us without moving a muscle, it's haunted me ever since. I still get chills thinking about it, and I've never gone back into those woods.